All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Until then, adios.
Conversations from the Dark Side.
Look at us here. Welcome to another exciting evening of Conversations from the Dark Side. It is I, Flack, Rob Flack Aaron here. Here next to me is the man behind all this madness, the one and only Mr. Amigo Aaron. I think for shows like these, one of the paths to success is having a small and finite topic that doesn't get too big. And so what we picked for this show was horror movies, which we narrowed it down to about 7 million films that have been released over the past 100. Some of the first films ever released were horror movies. Also, hanging out here on the drum riser, back over here, we have the one and only Mr. John Boatofcar Shawler. How you doing, John?
Good evening, gentlemen. I will be here, off in the distance, off camera, but willing to participate in your wonderful chat.
Boat is hanging out with us. Not known for his love of horror movies, but we're going to drag him along on this exciting adventure. We're going to get his opinion later on some of these movies and see some of the things he's seen. So, Aaron, let's jump into it. I want to ask you, in general, well, you know, before we even start talking about some of the topics that we wrote down, what is your relationship in general with horror movies? Are you a fan of horror movies? Do you like the old stuff, the new stuff? How do you feel about horror movies?
It's a checkered past, if I'm honest, because I find myself, okay, you know, it's funny. So there are plenty of horror movies. They're some of my favorite movies or horror-esque movies. And I go look back on them in fondness. I'm glad I watched them. But on the whole, I usually avoid modern horror movies. There was a point where they got too realistic and creepy. And I mean, when I say creepy, I mean like body horror stuff. I mean, body horror, for example, has always been part of horror. You know, everything from Frankenstein, you know, to Dr. Jekyll. There have been plenty of movies, but I mean, you know, when you're realistically disemboweling people and you're realistically chopping off limbs and heads and splitting brains and torturing people, so I don't like it. I don't like the torture porn stuff, which it seems to be the way a lot of stuff went. I mean, even back in the 70s, they did it. You know, I didn't watch it then, and so that stuff I avoid. But so I try to go back. And most of the horror that I watch is going to be stuff that happened before now. So I would say, you know, probably 20 years and back is really my wheelhouse. All the way back to the 50s and 40s, you know, where horror was a lot different than it is today.
Yeah, you know, when I was a kid, when I was younger, probably in the 90s, I got this hardback book that is basically, it says it's the complete history of horror cinema. It's this big, it's like a coffee table book. It's full of big pictures and stuff. And the book was published in the early 70s, and it goes through all the phases of horror up until that point. You know, you've got the old classic, the Universal monsters. You've got all the 50s, you know, the kind of hokey stuff. You've got the Hammer films. You know, it goes through all those phases. And the last chapter, it's like an added on chapter at the very end, and it goes into The Exorcist. And it starts off and it says, you know, a few months ago, possibly the most graphic and scariest horror movie of all time was released. And it talks about The Exorcist. And then towards the end of it, it says, I don't think that, you know, the authors do not think that there will ever be a more graphic or more violent or scarier movie to ever grace the screen. And I thought, boy, did they not see what was coming.
Yeah.
I mean, The Exorcist is obviously a landmark horror film, but things got a lot worse after The Exorcist. That was not the peak.
You know, The Exorcist.
Let me
I
ask
will
you guys
say.
a question.
Oh, go ahead, Bode.
You guys have both seen The Exorcist, right?
Yeah.
Many times.
Okay. So, do you think that was really a break? I mean, do you think it was sort of a new level of the combination of, profanity coming out of this girl's mouth plus the special effects? Do you think that was sort of a new bar, a new high or low bar, depending on how you think about it for horror movies?
It was certainly was at the time. It was. You got to think now. It's depending on your perspective, perhaps unfortunate, but I know that my kids were hearing people say the F-bomb on music they were listening to when they were 10 years old. It was just unavoidable. Right. It's barely, there was a time where that was the ultimate taboo. And definitely at that time to hear, a young actress say some of the things she says in that movie was over the top, so it definitely pushed envelopes in that aspect, but also there's some deep story to The Exorcist. You have Father Karras, who's like really questioning his devotion to the church, and he's really being put through the ringer, as he's going through this process with Reagan. And so, there's a lot to it. So it wasn't just, it was definitely graphically, and the special effects again were things that put it over the top, but story-wise, it was so much more than a lot of the earlier horror movies that weren't, quite as deep story-wise.
Yeah,
because there are people that I remember, and I'm sorry, Aaron, I'll let you answer in just a second, but there are people that, I've read accounts of people that, that The Exorcist affected them for weeks after they watched it, and I just can't imagine a horror movie that came out before The Exorcist that had that kind of psychological impact. Go ahead, Aaron.
Well, I would say it was a landmark. There is a sort of a before and after in horror with The Exorcist. It really is, and it is a disturbing film. I've seen it maybe twice, and I didn't like it either time. It's not my cup of tea. Especially what it really does is if it can get to you if you're a fan of, if you're not a fan, but if you're particularly religious, then it's particularly frightening. If you're just some schlup, you don't care, you're like, look at that. But if you're religious, like, oh my God, it's the thing I hate the most personified in a little girl, no good. And then there's also the fact that it's based on a true story-ish, and that's a whole other road. I saw a demonologist talk quite a bit about this case, and while there was a case this was based on, this has little to do with it. That a lot of the stuff that happens in the film, did not happen in the case. There are plenty of actual exorcism cases that are documented. You can take it with a grain of salt, but so if you look at it that way, it's much more chilling. To me, the fact that this could be something that sort of happened, but the effects, they also, it's one of those movies where they went there, and no one else was going there, but they went there. And when you go there, you're the first one to go there, then everyone else is going there, but you were there first, so there's also that.
Right. Let me ask you guys just sort of a broad question. What do you, in your opinion, makes a film the most scary? When you're watching a horror film, what's the aspect that actually makes it the most scary to you?
You know what? We actually have that as one of the things that we were going to talk about tonight. I kind of made, just some different things. I will say that there are things that bother me in films more than other things. I will tell you, for me personally, typically supernatural stuff to me is less scary because it's not something I worry about happening to me in real life. There's plenty of like the original Alien, the franchise is a science fiction franchise, but the first movie, Alien, is definitely a horror movie. And So it's a scary movie to watch because you've got Ripley and you've got this alien and then you've added this twist, which is anytime you try to hurt the alien's blood is acid and it's going to hurt you back. So now you've got something chasing you that you also can't attack, right? So it's this weird kind of thing, and it's scary when the alien jumps out. It's scary, and when it's around the corner, or you know she's being hunted. Like, those things are scary, but it's not a long-term scary thing for me, because when I go to bed at night, I'm not worried about the alien's not going to be in my closet, right? Mm-hmm. But I remember watching The Strangers. I think that's the name of it, which is I don't know what it was, 10 years old, something like that. And The Strangers is essentially and it's kind of I would put it in that essentially in that torture porn kind of genre, but the gist of The Strangers is these people are in a cabin, and these bad people show up and they do bad things to them. They torture them and they kill them and they do things. And towards the end of the movie, they say, why are you doing this? And that's what you're trying to figure out as a viewer. Like, why are they doing this? What's the connection? Is it somebody from their past? Is it somebody that knows them or something? And then basically what the bad guys say is, we're just bad people. We just like doing this. We like hurting people, And to me, that's terrifying. The thought of violence without violence for the sake of violence, I suppose. And you could probably put Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that category. It's just a family that sets traps for people, and when they get there, it's bad news. So it's not. You haven't done anything. All you did was go to the wrong place. So
really what you fear is like sadistic people. That's the ultimate fear, is that there's people out there that just get a thrill, or they get pleasure out of the pain, torture, and death of others.
Sure. The motive is, there's no motive. I mean, the motive is the act itself. So yeah, that's right. That's definitely one thing that disturbs me in a horror film.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. There was no way I'd ever watch that movie. I remember the previews for it, and I was just like, nah, it's not my bag. It's just like even something like The Purge. Like, I don't know, I'm not interested, man, and or Saw or any of the other movies. I just or Hostel. I just don't care, And I'm one of these people. Listen, there's nothing wrong with having a good scare, But and there are movies that I will watch that will scare me, even stuff that's like supernatural. Every once in a while, like, for example, I don't know if you ever saw a movie called Jeepers Creepers, but sure. There's a scene in the movie where these guys are driving down this back road and they see this guy dumping a body in this tube in this cemetery, and then the guy sees them drive by, and it almost becomes almost like The Duel we talked about last week, where this guy's in this big nasty truck and he's coming to get him, And now, early in the film, before you realize what this dude is, it's pretty creepy to me, that because I go out a lot of these dirt roads and stuff, and so I go past places like that all the time, so I can absolutely see driving down a road, and then all of a sudden you see someone screwing around in a graveyard. He sees you seeing him, and he comes after you. I can get behind that. I don't mind that.
Is the dude in Jeepers Creepers an alien?
No, he's a weird, he's a demon guy. But the point of it is, it can happen. But I mean, I don't mind being scared. I don't mind a little bit of gross stuff either. I can tolerate a little bit. But I mean, I got a limit. And it's like, I look at it the same way like the new Mortal Kombat and stuff. It's cool in the old days when you can see a guy get his head cut off or he got cut in half. Okay, yeah, that's pretty kind of neat. But I don't want to necessarily see an X-ray of his entrails being jostled, and for a multitude of reasons, it seems dumb to me. It also is not something that I enjoy. I don't necessarily want to see that, So any sort of body horror type stuff, any sort of torture stuff, you're right. That's what gets me too. The fact that that could be you. You could be the guy getting tortured. People get tortured all the time. It happens. It's not that funny. It's not something I want to see it realistically depicted. I met Tom Savini one time. He's a genius and a legend, and he's a special effects genius. And I'm sure people like him and his ilk could come up with all sorts of incredible effects to make this stuff realistic, but I don't need that. I don't need computer generating, this stuff. I don't need it. I got enough to think about. I want a diversion,
That's part of the thing is old, like, if you think of something, I'm just off the top of my head, like Silence of the Lambs, where the fear is that the guy is gonna get you. Like if Hannibal Lecter catches you, he's gonna eat you. Like that's the fear, right? Or when the girl is in the basement, and Buffalo Bill is bad things are going to happen to that girl, right? But that was where the tension came from. That was the horror, And now it's like, hey, I'm going to, eat this person, and then they eat the person, and they show you eating a person, and then
right.
So it's not scary, it's gross, and that's a different. It's not scary to me. It's just
you think they're playing on a different emotion, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Silence of the Lambs, I know that's old to some people. It's not really that old, but I wanted to, since we're talking about horror movies and trying to just kind of, we talked about a little bit about our past horror movies, but what I wanted to ask you was, do you remember the first horror movie that you saw, like the first good horror movie?
That's a good question. Do you remember yours?
Mine.
I'm going to think about that.
Yep.
What do you guys?
I was in fourth grade, and I was at Hurricane Town Elementary, and we watched Watcher in the Woods. Are you guys aware of that movie?
I'm very familiar with it. Yes. It's a Disney. It's probably one of the scary, right up there with Something Wicked This Way Comes. Two of the scariest Disney movies ever made.
Even as a kid, I was in fourth grade, so I was like 10. I was like, I cannot believe I am watching this film in school. I cannot believe they are letting us watch this film in school, because it was so freaky, and it had all of the elements of scary film. You had, obviously, it was a lot of, like, you had a kid that would write things backwards. It was you had like seances, you had girls, that were being lifted up, you had disappearances, you had a drowning, a kid was was being drowned. Everything about that movie made me afraid. And then later on in life, when I was in college, I realized it was a Disney movie, and that blew my mind. I couldn't believe that Disney would put out something that was so freaky.
It's definitely one of those movies where when my kids say things like you can't say that, you can't show that on TV, you can't, and I go, you know what, we're from the generation that watch movies like Watcher in the Woods at school. We're somehow, I mean, not to sidetrack, but when we were really young, we watched The Elephant Man in school, which is a horrible movie. Like when we were
it's a horror movie in its own way.
It is. It's kind of gets back to the body horror, So, yeah, Watcher in the Woods. I don't know if have you ever seen it, Aaron?
I had to say this is one I the Retroist did a workup on this a couple months ago. And I was like, wow,
that's right.
I've heard about this, but it is one I've not seen. I have to say it's one I've seen, but it's on my list.
Yeah, the woman who lives in this old house that this family moves into is Betty Davis, which right off the bat, that's scary enough, And then, and then the young girl that shows up, her name, or the girl who disappeared, her name was Karen, and this girl keeps writing Narek like backwards on stuff, which is, I mean, if it was good enough for The Shining to write
it's
red rum on everything,
it's a red room callback,
yeah, you can do that, and then at the end, they're like, listen, the only way to get this girl back is to have another seance in this, like church when the lightning strikes and all this. And they go, and by the way, you might get zapped to the other dimension, but at least we'll get old Karen back. and well, then your sister being gone, that's your problem. You need to have your own seance in 20 years and bring your sister back. So, that's definitely that's a good one to get started. And I do think there's a lot of that kind of intermediate kind of horror these days, or even years ago, like Goosebumps and things like that kind of transition kids into horror, like
Yeah.
if they're like that sort of stuff or whatever. But watching the
There's
woods,
the whole like you guys are a little bit too old to probably have appreciated this, but during the SNCC, the Saturday Night Nickelodeon, there was a series called "Are You Afraid of the Dark," which was an anthology series.
yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, I agree with you that I mean it was a little young for our age group, but yeah, I am familiar with it.
Yeah,
And
I've
so
heard of
like
it.
that was the stuff that was, and it's just like I always tell Aaron, I'm a big fan of creepy, but I don't, as soon as things start to get into the realms of, like you said, like when you have people, it's sort of that sadistic, joy in the physical torture and pain of people, that I just like, I check out. I'm like, this is not entertainment to me anymore, but I love being creeped out. That's a good feeling.
Yeah, it's funny. I told my wife I was watching some horror movie the other day, and I don't remember what it was, but the killer was just one of these guys that was like really sadistic, And I told her, I was like, when did killers in movies get so mean? I mean, because there was a time like, and I want to talk about these, but the classic '80s franchises like Michael Myers and Jason and Freddy and all those guys. I mean they're bad people, right? Like Freddy and I'm going to talk about Nightmare on Elm Street right now, but Freddy's a bad guy, right? Like he was, depending on which version of the movie, and there was. Some in the original, they said they wouldn't say that he was a child molester. They were like, he was a child kidnapper and kind of a child killer, but like kind of danced around it a little bit. Like that's better than other options, But in the remake, they just came out and said it, But even Freddy, I mean, he's telling jokes. He's doing funny stuff, and it's more comic bookish. Like he's going to die in the next movie, he's coming back. So I don't know, just didn't seem that serious. But I in sixth grade, I've talked about on my podcast. Behind my house was this giant creek. The creek was, just it was like a drainage ditch thing, but this is before they paved them. It was just a big, wild, giant ditch. It was, 20 feet across and 10 feet deep. I mean, it was just this giant chasm thing. It touched my backyard. My backyard backed up into it. And one of my friends from school moved into a house directly behind me on the other side of the creek. So instead of going all the way around, I could get to his house by just going through the creek, go down, jump over where the water is, go up the other side, climb up. And so I could get over to his house. And I was at his house one night, the Friday or Saturday night. And on HBO, they said, coming up next, A Nightmare on Elm Street. And so their family was going to watch it. And they said, can you watch horror movies? And I go, I don't know. I said, I don't think I ever watched one before, And they go, well, you better call your parents, So I had to call my mom. And I'm like, listen, I'm over at Jason's house. They're going to watch, Nightmare on Elm Street on HBO. Is that okay? And she's like, if you want to watch it, And so we watched that. I mean, we watched the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And, Nightmare on Elm Street, most of it, I think it's aged pretty well as a horror movie. There's a few of the effects that haven't aged perfectly. But overall, as a story and a one-off thing, it's a good story, And I don't remember what time it came on. It was when HBO, they would only show R-rated movies at night. So I watched it, and now it's 10 or 11 o'clock, and now I got to go home. And I had to go home through the creek. And let me tell you, you ever seen a little chubby kid run fast? Man, I was sliding down that ditch. I was running through there. I just knew Freddy was going to be down there waiting for me. But that was, I mean, I remember like that was the first time. And then when I got home, like I was terrified. And then I was like, but that was kind of fun. That kind of little adrenaline rush, that kind of spook that you got. I was like, that was kind of cool. And so, I think that's kind of what got me hooked on horror movies. Was there a movie, maybe not the first one, but was there a movie like what's an early horror movie that you remember seeing that you were like, hey, I really like this, like something that kind of got you into watching horror? And Aaron, I know you watch a lot of the older like anthology things and older movies. Was it something like that you saw?
I was pretty tardy to the party on horror movies because I was kind of a big old coward. You know what I mean? But much like Bo was talking about watching this at school, I remember when I was in 6th grade, our band teacher thought it would be a good idea for us to watch Poltergeist in there. You know, I go to the 6th or 7th grade, so we're in here watching Poltergeist now, and I can tell that this movie is one of the scariest movies ever, especially a PG-13 movie, which is madness to me, as I recall. I'm pretty sure it was PG-13 when it came out. I think it was one of the first ones. And this movie scared the crap out of us. And I honestly don't know. My band director would show us this stuff on the premise that it had good instrumental music in it. And maybe this does, but that's not what I was thinking about when the cloud came.
The worst selling point of watching Poltergeist I've ever heard.
Let's put it this way. I remember the movies he used to like to have us watch. It was an eclectic blend. We'd see Annie. We would see Poltergeist, and Flash Gordon was another one I saw. That was another weird one we would put in there.
Mr. Simmons, because Aaron and I both had the same band director in middle school.
Yeah,
he was the master of doing the Christmas concert. We would do sometime like mid-November. It wouldn't even be December yet, because there would be a solid 3 or 4 weeks where we would just watch movies. So
it's funny because I don't remember ever doing any concerts, not one in middle school. So I'm not sure.
Maybe in your day there were no concerts.
I'm not sure we ever performed for anyone. If we did, it may have been very rare. But
there's the teachers that want to become teachers because they want to change people's lives and they want to, help youth become better people. And then there are the teachers that are like, boy, I can't wait to watch a bunch of movies this year. He's got his little card, his Blockbuster card. He's like, I got to check 7 more. Let's see. We got Poltergeist. We got Annie.
Yeah.
We watched American Ninja. I know the first time I ever saw American Ninja was in band. First time I ever saw Cloak and Dagger. Princess Bride, pretty much my entire 80s movie.
We watched
because of the soundtracks, right?
Yep, watched that in band. Yep.
Yeah, the soundtrack for Crawl's awesome. But
did you? I wanted to ask Bo, did you see Poltergeist early on? Was that something that you saw early?
I still have never seen Poltergeist. That's probably one of the horror movies that I would voluntarily watch, though.
Man, I don't know.
Just because it did have a PG rating when it was first released.
Yeah,
and it's definitely more of the. It's definitely more on the creepy side than the sort of body horror side.
Well, that's not true. There's a scene in this where a guy rips his own face off in
Never mind,
detail.
It is a dream, though. I will tell you this.
See it.
Hallucination. The Poltergeist. When I first saw it, there's the three children in the house, right? And I remember, like, when you're a kid and you start putting stuff together, and I'm watching this movie, and the middle kid's name was Robbie, and I'm like, hey, my name is Robbie. And they're like, well, that kid's in 3rd grade. And I'm like, hey, I'm in 3rd grade. And then there's a scene where he has a tree right outside his window, and the tree, the branches are scraping on the window and stuff. I had a tree outside my window that did the same thing, and I was like, I don't like where this is going. Yeah. I feel like this is one of those like a Twilight Zone episode where I'm going to end up in the movie. Twilight Zone, or not Twilight Zone, Poltergeist. I actually watched that with my kids one time when they were a little, they were middle-aged teens. They were tweens, teens, that kind of 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. And as you know, the premise of Poltergeist is that the spirits that are talking to the young girl, the Carol Ann, they basically come through the television after the TV channels go off,
Yeah.
And so the TV goes off and they show the Star Spangled Banner, and they play the music, and then the channel goes off into static, and both my kids look at me and they go, what happened?
Yeah.
And I go, well, the channel went off. And they were like, well, why? The ghost do it? And I was like, no, that's how it worked. And they go, what do you mean that's how it worked? I go, Yeah, you know, when your dad grew up, TV just went off at midnight. There was no show on at 12:30.
Yeah.
That was it. TV went off for 6 hours, you know, and they were like, no, you're pulling our leg, you know.
The kids have nothing to worry about now from Poltergeist. They can't get through.
No.
There is no static anymore. It's the blue screen. You don't have to worry.
It's always on. Yeah, they're not going to get it through telemarketing or whatever. So, you know what? I had one other early horror memory. I remember I spent the night at this kid's house one time. This is it must have been the same summer. It was right around that same time. And we spent the night, and he had a cable box. And if you stuck a credit card in the little slot, you could unscramble the channels. You remember this challenge? So it was, paid channels like HBO, Showtime. It would scramble the TV, but somehow, if you stuck a piece of plastic or something in the box, I don't know how it worked, but you could get pay-per-view. And then every now and then, or not pay-per-view, but paid channels. And then sometimes you have to re-wiggle it or whatever. And we did that, and it was Children of the Corn.
Oh yes.
And Children of the Corn is one of those movies that I think it depends on your age. Boat, have you ever seen Children of the Corn?
No.
It's based on a Stephen King book, and the gist of it is that these people, their car breaks down. They go to a town looking for help, but when they go to the town, they realize there's no adults there. It's only kids, and then we find out what the kids have done to the adults and what they're eventually gonna do to these people.
Let me ask, did they kill the adults?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
And you know what? I do feel like a lot of times when we talk about horror, there's a lot of twist endings and stuff, and I think like, hey, I don't want to spoil that. But also, Children of the Corn's 40 years old, so I feel like I could spoil it a little bit.
Wait, I forgot she was in this too. The chick from Terminator. God.
Oh, that's right, Linda Hamilton. Yeah, she's
totally
in it.
forgot. It's been forever since I saw this one.
But the gist of it is that the kids, you think the kids are really evil, and then they're listening to one. It's not Malachi, it's the other kid. And he keeps saying, you know, he's like a preacher, but he's like a 12-year-old preacher, right? So he's really kind of creepy little kid. And he keeps saying, like, we got to do what he who walks among the rows says, you know. So it's like he's a evangelical, and he's telling all the kids. And so it kind of leads up to the fact that this kid is making all this up. But at the end, we find out he is not making it up. There is something in the cornfield that is making the kids, that is leading the kids to do this. So
what is in the cornfield?
Oh, like Mr. Bad Guy.
Yeah.
Like serious bad guy.
Is he an alien?
No, he's demonic.
It's
And
another demon? Freaking demons,
Yes.
I'm telling you, man.
yes. And I remember, I think Sean and I, one time we were podcasting, and I said, we were talking about this movie, and I said, as a kid, or even a young adult, this is a scary thing, right? Like the whole thing. But when I got older, I thought, like, it hit me, like, I was like, I think I can beat up a 10-year-old. Like, I don't, like, when they go like, oh, the 10-year-olds are coming, like, I think I could whoop a 10-year-old. Now, there's going to be a line. I mean,
yeah, but they mob you. That's the thing. They got weapons.
Yeah.
And they get to jump. You know what I mean? That's
I could take
them.
I'm not going to outrun them.
No.
I mean, I'm going to stay and fight, and I'm good for about 3 at a time. But, and then, you get one of those kids like 13, and then they're into sports or something. They could probably take me. A couple of them gang up on me. I might be in trouble.
Listen,
but
we just played Huntington last night in football, and there were middle school kids out there that towered over me.
Yeah.
And so
kids are huge.
Yeah,
now.
I will say that, when my son, he played basketball for the YMCA, and he moved up to the 15-year-old league. And when we got to 15, we showed up for tryouts, and there were kids dunking, and I went, let's go. Like, I'll just buy you some ice cream. You might want to give up that dream. So, Children of the Corn, Stephen King, there's a lot of Stephen King horror movies. We could talk about those. But there's a lot of different genres of horror movies, and one of the genres that I thought about that there's a lot of, and I thought, throwing this out because I think there may be some that Aaron's familiar with, are haunted house movies. I think probably at least early on. I mean, Poltergeist definitely falls into this, and of course, there's always like, why is the house haunted? Like Poltergeist, the house is haunted because it was built on top of the Indian burial ground. That was the big thing in Poltergeist. But there are sometimes it's because someone has died, someone has done something. But I think the quintessential haunted house movie has got to be Amityville Horror, which we touched on a little bit last week. Amityville Horror, the big selling point was based on a true story, and then it's based on a true story in the sense that there is a town called Amityville. Well, it's not even, it's Amity, or whatever. And,
it begins
and
and
like
ends there, huh?
there are some people there, so it was pretty exposed as being a thing that was dreamed up, I believe, over a case of wine.
It was a husband or wife, I believe, put it together.
It was, yeah.
And when they wrote the book, but this was a frightening movie.
Now, let me ask you guys a question, because you guys have both seen this movie.
Oh yeah, long
and
ago.
I have not. And
Yeah.
so, what makes Amityville Horror scarier than The Exorcist? Because they both deal with a child, right?
Nothing. It's not scarier than The Exorcist, but it's scary. But it's not scarier than The Exorcist,
Okay.
in my opinion.
I don't know. It could. I mean, it's up there. So the gist of this, the part of the story that is true, is that in real life there was this house, the Amityville Horror House, and there was what is it, the I want to say that it's the DeLeo, is that right? I might have that wrong, but a family that lived there, and one of their siblings went through the house one night and killed everybody in the family with a shotgun. He killed
That's real. That's fact.
That is real. Yes, that is a fact. 4 siblings and his parents. He shot them all one at a time with a shotgun. Now, and so the house went up for sale, and DeFeo, that's the name. William DeFeo, and the DeFeo family. So the house went on the market, and it turns out it's pretty tough to sell a house locally when everybody got shot with a shotgun in the house. And so these two people they moved across country, and they bought the house and moved into it, and they lived in the house for 1 month. Now, the events that take place in the book, and then then the movie after that, have been highly debated. But yes, they did move into a house. So one of the arguments was that the house became haunted because this guy killed these people. But then he, in real life, in court, claimed defense that he was possessed, and that forced him. So that kind of added to the credence of the story. But there's just some creepy stuff. There's the youngest kid in this movie. What's her name? Jody, Jody is the pig. But the youngest kid, she keeps saying, "Oh, I'm talking to my friend Jody," and then they go, "Oh, where's Jody?" And like, "Well, you can't see Jody. Only I can see Jody." And then one day she goes, "Hey, Jody's outside the window," and they look out, and there's just these glowing red eyes that are out there.
That's pretty freaky.
There's a lot of stuff like that, and then as kind of like The Shining, what we see, definitely the father of the family is losing his mind. He is slowly being taken over by whatever is in the house. But really, I think the best summary of Amityville Horror was done as a joke by Eddie Murphy, which I will paraphrase, and he says basically there's the difference between black families and white families. And then he says, a black family buys the Amityville Horror House, and they walk in, and the house says, "Get out," and he says, "Too bad, can't stay," and they turn around and leave. And I gotta say, based on the early events in the Amityville Horror, I think I probably would have been with Eddie Murphy on that. One other thing I will mention is that the middle kid Daniel, I think is his name. The middle kid, and this is in real life, the middle kid swears that everything that happened in the movie happened in real life.
Yeah.
And there's a documentary about him, and he's a very angry middle-aged man now. And he sees therapists and all these things. And so that's really, I mean, there are many tragedies of the Amityville horror story in real life, but I think that's one of the biggest ones is that I think, you know, when you're a kid, you can be told a story so many times that just becomes part of your memory, you know. And he, you know, even his siblings say they won't talk about the Amityville Horror Days, but there's a whole documentary that he was in. And he swears that everything that happened in there was true. He gets very angry if you suggest that it didn't happen. And so that was always a weird twist when everybody else that was involved kind of said, based.
You know,
it's a true story.
Well, much like Eddie Murphy, I am going to say good night at this point. Peace out. So thank you, Rob. Thank you, Aaron, for having me on for a brief moment. And yeah, I will continue to listen and enjoy the rest of the episode.
Hey, while you're listening, turn off the lights, go out there and check under all your beds, check the closets, look underneath the bed for a clown doll. If you watch Poltergeist, you'll understand that later. So
listen, I'm leaving the lights on the rest of the night. Good night, guys.
See you later, boat.
Probably a safe idea. So
It's funny because when you said, I was queuing it up too. When you said that you knew the quintessential haunted house film, we were on different pages here because in my mind, oh yeah, the quintessential haunted house film to me is and has always been The House on Haunted Hill. Vincent Price.
Oh, classic.
I love this movie. It's creepy but goofy. It's fun but wacky. It's all the stuff you expect from a movie of this era. And the premise of it is this guy invites all these people to a big party at this big creepy mansion because he basically doesn't like them. And that's the premise anyway. In actuality, he's basically screwing with his wife's screwing with him, trying to get him shot, trying to have heart attacks. It's a big convoluted mess, but the plot's pretty interesting. But it does culminate with one of the all-time classic goofy scenes, because in the bottom of this house is like a pit of acid, and so a skeleton. If you'll remember that part where the skeleton comes out on strings, and and the chick falls in the acid. It's got Vincent Price. Enough said. They remade.
So wasn't this?
What's that? Go ahead.
Was this in the theater? Is this where they also had the skeleton on the string?
That's exactly right.
So in the movie, the skeleton, he comes out, and then in the actual theater, they did the same thing. They would have basically on a zip line, they would have a skeleton, and they would swing it out over the crowd.
I love that. I think it's been colorized too. I think if you look around, you can find a color version. If you got a hang up. Now the funny thing is, so they remade this movie in 1999. They weren't partying that day. And I saw this in the theater because, like I said, I was a big fan. And I tell you right now, I was much fonder of the classic version, but I thought this one was much scarier. Part of it because and I won't go too deep into this, but I wasn't in my right frame of mind in the theater when I saw this. And so I'm telling you right now, this freaking creeped me out, brother. The remake. So if you ever want to just see something disturbing, you can watch the remake. But if you just want to have a good time with a haunted house flick, I don't think you can go wrong. I like a lot of the old Vincent Price stuff just because it's Vincent Price. He knew what he was doing, and a lot of people don't realize that he did, Vincent Price did all the movies, the good, bad, everything in between. He was funding his art habit. He was a big art guy, and he actually opened up the first art museum in California, a very prominent art museum. And so, and he did, Vincent Price, of course, we could talk for 10 hours about his work in horror film, but he Of course, he did everything, and not just horror. He had a great voice. But he actually, among other things, he's credited with bringing art to the masses. He was involved with, he was hired by Sears, of all people, to come up with a basically art that you could buy in your home at a reasonable price so people could experience the arts at home. So it's funny to think that a guy as creepy and as macabre as Vincent Price was out there doing this stuff in the high art world. It always amused me that the wacky differences between what he did on the screen and what he did in real life. You had another one on here that scared me too. I guess you're gonna get into it.
Before you say that, I wanted to say real quick that my introduction to Vincent Price, believe it or not, was his the spoken word part at the end of Thriller.
That was your very first time you ever heard about Vincent Price?
Yeah, I was like 10 years old, and then I was saying that, and then my parents were like, "You don't know who that is?" And I was like, "Nah, I don't think so." And then they were like, "Hey, we got this this movie we want to show you." So I think that was like the summer where I watched like the Dr. Phibes films, and wasn't he in Murders of the Rue Morgue? I mean,
he did all he did all the Edgar Allan Poe stuff, you know. And was good at it.
We got a couple other horror ones on here, and or haunted house ones. So let's run through those, and then we'll take our first break. One that I had on here was The Haunting, which I think has been remade a couple times as well. It was based on Shirley Jackson's original story, which is The Haunting of Hill House. Shirley Jackson, also known for, she wrote another little horror story, I believe, called Frankenstein. But The Haunting of Hill House, I believe, is kind of credited as the first haunted house movie or a haunted house story. I mean, not story, but haunted house book, novel. So it's kind of like you watch that one, and that's like the building block that all these other ones build off of. So that one's a classic. I don't know if you've seen that one. Yes, the original. That's my favorite. One I didn't put on the list, but if we're talking about these, we'll give 30 seconds to The Shining. I mean, The Shining is definitely
and that's another one. Yeah, that's exactly perfect for this category. It's funny. The first time I ever saw this, I was like a man. I wasn't a young man. I was a man. And I remember I was at my mom and dad's house. I watched it in the middle of the afternoon, edited on commercial TV, and it still scared the crap out of me. I was like, my God, this is frightening. I wasn't even sure why I was scared half the time, because this is a good use of weirdness to scare you. And they did a real good job. They didn't go overboard with it, But, man, I agree. This is an all-time classic right here, faux show.
I remember watching Ready Player One. I had read the book Ready Player One, and there's one of the challenges where they had gone into their virtual world where they were doing things. They were had gone into I don't even remember what it was, but in the movie they changed it. In the movie they ended up going into a recreation of The Shining, and so they're walking through the hotel. They're technically they're virtual people, but on what we're seeing, it seems real, and they recreated all the sets and stuff for The Shining, and it was fun. And of course, the elevator opens and we get the scene where the blood rushes out of the elevator, and I remember my son going, "What is going on?" And I'm like, it's from another movie. I'll show you that movie some other time, but this is kind of a callback to that.
And that's a Chinese one. You don't want to come in halfway through either. You sort of have to be there for the whole thing to see it ramp up to get the full effect. Because I've seen parts of this a few times. I was just like, too weird. But once I watched the whole thing, I got it. Even the opening scene where they're just following the car is creepy with that music they got playing.
It's definitely the old school type of horror where tension ramps up. It's over time. It's like little things until you get the big ending. Last one I put on here is one of the newer ones that I put on the list, which was Paranormal Activity. Did you see Paranormal Activity?
Are you kidding? Of course, I saw it in the theater, and
did too.
I thought, man, this is the first part of it's really boring. And then I watched it, and I thought it was sort of creepy, in its own way. And now it's the kind that will stick with you when you're back at the house,
Right.
Especially that's before the entire genre of like ghost hunting stuff had been like murdered to death and beat with a dead stick. You know, so that made it a little more interesting. Plus, I'd done some of this stuff before. You know, and the thought of getting hassled while you sleep is, you know, much like the Freddy stuff, never fun.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I don't want to be. I mean, if a ghost wants to come at me at 3:30 in the afternoon, we'll go around. But yeah, leave me alone when I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of sacred. I will say, I remember my dad watched this movie, and he told me that the scariest part of this film was when there's a scene where they keep going to. I'm sure most people are familiar with this, but if you're not, it's it was a kind of a found footage type film, and the guy and the family they're setting up their camera at night because they think there's something's bothering them, and it starts being paranormal activity, and of course that we get the scene of, I think it's the wife that's playing with the Ouija board. Never played with the Ouija board in this movies, but there's a scene where they're worried about somebody coming and getting them at night, and the guy puts flour on the floor outside the bedroom door, and the next morning there's footprints in the flour. And my dad, to this day, says that's the scariest scene in this movie, because up until that movie, my dad says, if I ever see a ghost in real life, the first thing I'm going to do is run towards it. I want to go see what that thing is. I'm not running away from a ghost, I want to go. I want to find out what it is, But a minute, if it can leave footprints in flour, that means it can touch you.
Yeah.
I mean, that means it's interacting with things. And he goes, "That's in that movie." He said, "That's the moment I got scared." Now I will tell you, there's there was a couple of endings to this movie, and I don't know if they were all. I don't know if the theater was only shown one and then the DVD had a different one or something, but I can tell you when I saw it, there's an ending where the guy, he gets just like thrown violently towards the camera, like he goes, and that thing hit, and I mean, there's not too many times where I thought like I might actually be peeing. Now, when that thing hit, I was like, that got me. That got me bad.
The movie to me, it got a little dopey when the wife was in like the weird trance for a good chunk of it. It was kind of weird, and not in I thought it was just kind of weird. I mean, who would just keep living? I'd be like, you're going to the funny farm, darling. Time for a visit to the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. But I'm a little like Eddie Murphy. Like, these people are definitely dedicated in their relationships. I come home, my wife's in a trance or floating. Sorry, can't stay. Yeah, or if I wake up and she's just standing at attention, like looking down at me, nah, we're getting divorced if you won't leave. But
exactly.
I didn't know that had multiple endings. But I will say it was a movie that got me. It got me a little bit with the premise of it. Now the sequels and stuff are just all horrible. Just horrible. I hated all of them. But what are you gonna do? I had one more I wanted to throw onto the pile.
Yeah, please do.
It was a Hammer film, actually. It was sort of a return for Hammer after a long time. God, I think it came out in I want to say it was out in 2012, and it was a haunted house movie. It was called The Woman in Black. I don't know if you saw this one, Flack.
Yeah,
it had it was based on a television movie, which was also scary, and I think that was based. There may have been a book in there. Who knows? This wasn't your normal. I mean, Hammer produced it. I don't know how much it had to do with the actual making. Of course, if you watch Hammer stuff, we'll probably get into them later. They had a gimmick, and they beat it in the ground. Their movies often had the same kind of play to them, but this one is just about a guy who comes to do the paperwork at this house. And the neat thing about the house is every night when the tide comes in, the house gets cut off from the rest of the world because the water comes in over the path it's on. This had the kid that played Harry Potter. What's that kid's name?
It did,
Daniel Radcliffe. There it is. It just showed up on the screen. And this is, to me, was your old school spooky haunted house stuff. It ramps up. It starts off with just a rocking chair, that shtick. And they really ramp up the creepy factor in this house. There's a lot of weird the toys and stuff in here that do a bunch of weird stuff. Just the way it looks. I thought this was a real winner, and I thought this is my pace of a modern horror film right here. It didn't get too disgusting, but it was I like creepy. I'm okay with that. I'm sort of like Boat in that department. I thought it was pretty creepy.
By having when the tide rises and it separates it off, that makes that isolation where you can't leave, and there was a lot of those old Hammer movies or whatever where people are driving and they're out in the middle of nowhere and their car breaks down and the only place they could go is in a castle. Sometimes it's Vincent Price lives in the castle, sometimes it's riffraff. You never know what you're gonna get, but you know what I mean? Like, it's that isolation factor, and I'll tell you, one of the things that actually made Amityville Horror a little less scary for me is I forget what the address is. It's like 112 Ocean Avenue. I used to know. I think that's what it is. I think it's 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville was the Amityville Horror House. Actually, they changed their address. Like they moved it a couple of numbers. So because people were sending them so much mail and stuff like that. But if you ever look at the house on Google Street View, if you zoom out about 10 feet, what you will see are two other houses. I mean, the houses are like 10 feet apart, and that's not how they make it look in that movie.
Yeah.
So when you're in a haunted house,
grills on it, so that's
it's just cropped perfectly. If you can go 10 feet away, I don't think you're in too much danger. So
that's sort of my philosophy in real life. Like, if I'm scared in my house, like when I lived up on Mud Mountain, like that was a whole different kettle of fish right there. But if I'm getting scared in this neighborhood, I'll walk out the road and go, help! Like honk the car horn. I figure somebody will show up.
Well, listen, I think we've covered a lot of my favorite haunted house movies. Another genre that I want to talk about is movies that have critters, animals, and stuff like that that can attack. So for those of you that are watching live on the stream, or if you're in the Discord, start thinking of your favorites. Aaron, I know you got some favorites. I got some favorites. Let's take a break, and when we get back, we'll talk about creatures that attack.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side. You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side.
Welcome back to Conversations from the Dark Side. It is I, Rob Flack O'Hara. Tonight I am sitting here. I don't know why I'm introducing you as a sidekick. This is Amigo Aaron's baby, and he's let me take the wheel here a little bit because he knows my love of horror films.
Yeah, take the wheel, brother. I love it.
I mean, the wheel in this one could be to a haunted car on a lone highway. We don't know where it's going to go, but... So we talked a little bit about haunted houses. I mean, obviously haunted houses are a staple of horror films, but another common theme in horror films is creatures, critters, animals, things that attack. This was, I think a lot of these, when I think of the oldest ones, I think of... in the 50s, you know, there was a lot of sci-fi films. Of course, that was kind of the atomic age, right? So we had all these things like, what happens if we set off nuclear bombs? What's going to happen? And one of the things that was going to happen was it was going to make big, giant killer ants.
Yeah.
Which we saw.
There's another one.
Night of the Lepus.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had ants in them. We had... there were several. What was the one? Do you remember the one that had the giant grasshopper?
Oh yeah, it's funny. I will say I've seen a ton of these. Okay,
yeah,
and almost all of them exclusively were on Mystery Science Theater. But I have seen the one where the giant grasshopper they ultimately killed it. I think in the Lincoln Tunnel, as I recall in that movie.
Yes.
But I have seen them. There's the ones that come to my mind. There's one where they're taking a giant, like a sloth-looking thing. It's like some kind of radiated. That's another one that comes to mind. We mentioned Night of the Lepus with the big rabbits is another one. There were anything that could grow up and be huge. There was one that was simply called. I don't know if you ever saw that. It was with snakes in it. It was just a series of S's.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yes.
So that was where a guy was experimenting on snakes to create this ultimate creature, I believe. And that was another one. These things early on, I don't think any of them, and I could be wrong here. You could jump in. I think most of these were no good. I mean, they were just if they're good for fun, but they weren't like what I would call like top shelf horror films.
They're not. Yeah, they weren't scary. It was more like a lesson thing. Like, well, if you mess around, you know, is it the beginning of the end? Is that the name of the grasshopper one? I think that might be it. But I remember my favorite line in that entire movie. Yeah, was the grasshopper. If you've seen, I never saw it on Mystery Science. It probably is a Mystery Science Theater special, but. There's a scene where it's like attacking these buildings, and it's very obviously what they've done is they've just printed a picture of a building, and then they put a real grasshopper on the picture of the building, and they're filming that, so it's just a grasshopper, walking on this building, but they end up shooting this grasshopper, and it falls to the ground, and this grasshopper is the size of a bus. It's gigantic. And the one officer, like the sergeant, he looks at the other guy and he goes, "Get that thing out of here." I'm like, that thing weighs 50 tons. What are you gonna just drag it by the leg? What are you gonna do?
You know what I love about these, and it happens in all these movies, right? In fact, we just saw it if you're watching at home, is that you've got the giant grasshopper or the giant spider or whatever, and there's always a scene where there's like someone getting ready to be eaten, but they can't just show you the guy like getting eaten by the spider. So there has to be a scene where the guy's standing completely alone, and he goes, "Oh!" Like he shakes his arms, and he opens his mouth, "Oh!" And that's to simulate. That's what he's getting it right there. And so that's what I love about it, man. Yeah, these are always fun because, I mean, if you think about it, most of these are probably made as cheap drive-in flicks. Although this one does have Peter Graves in it, beginning of the end. So, but I mean, I don't know how big a star he was in the 50s. But I mean, they were fun, cheap, and I don't know how much of these. I don't know how much this reflected the unease of the atomic age. I guess that's what they were going for. I don't know how effective that was or how much unease there was, to be honest with you. But they're always good for a laugh.
Yeah, someone in the chat mentioned Tarantula. That was another one that I remember. You know, in that book that I had of all the horror stuff, it had the scientist that was in the and a lot of these also other than nuclear, they always had to do with the scientists. Scientists are always messing around with stuff, and then that's how you get giant spiders. And I remember he had these giant bushy eyebrows. And I always wondered if like somebody saw that guy and they were like, you know, we could make a movie about tarantulas with that guy. Like maybe he inspired the movie. He just looks like that kind of guy.
That guy's super weird looking. I will say that. You're not
He
wrong
is.
there. It's real weird.
I remember watching Arachnophobia, which is, what is that, early 90s, mid 90s kind of, and it was the overrun of spiders. And I watched that with my dad, and my dad said, you know, the only reason that we as human beings can coexist on this planet with spiders is because they're small and we're big. And he said, if spiders were the size of dogs, we'd have to wipe them out. We could not live in a world that was full of spiders the size of dogs. We just couldn't get
never
along.
go to Australia, because I've seen some pictures
Yeah,
there, which is why no one lives down there, except for the most hardy men and women. Because that's no good.
I didn't agree with them. So I would say for me, the transition from those kind of silly sci-fi, you know, type movies to one that was actually scary was probably The Birds.
Yes.
Which is a classic Hitchcock, you know, and let me tell you, Alfred Hitchcock, some of these movies, you know, you watch them and you go, well, that ain't scary. You watch the trailer and you go, well, that's not scary. But I'm here to tell you, when I saw The Birds for the first time, like I saw it in my bedroom, you know, and the birds are breaking the glass when she's trying to hide in the phone booth, and they're smashing the glass and they're smashing the car. They can't get away, you know, and then at the end, there's just more birds and more birds. Like that's a scary, and it's a scary thought where you just think like all you got to think is like, what happens if tomorrow, what happens if birds turn on us? That's it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, next thing you know, we're in the middle of a birdemic.
You know, oh God, now that's a bad film. But you know, The Birds. I read a biography on this movie and the other works of Hitchcock. And Hitchcock, hey, listen, he made some great films. All right, there's no denying that. But I mean, he was not a good guy. He was not nice, and he also he wanted what he wanted, and he got what he wanted. And in one of the major scenes in The Birds, I had him taking the lead actress and physically tying birds to her, and then forcing her to do take after take. And these, you know, you tie a crap with a bird to a sucker, they're just gonna be like, that's cool. They're pecking and scratching and going to crazy eight bonkers because they're wild animals, man. You know, and so she got pummeled by these things. She talks about what a horrible experience it was, and that's before you have to deal with the weird advances of Alfred Hitchcock in the background and stuff. And as much as I'm a big fan of his stuff. I mean, it's great, and I love his television show. I love it, but you have to watch that knowing that this guy was a goofball. But this is one scary flick. Much like he was very good with building suspense and building tension, and this movie's got that in the aces. I love this one a lot.
Birds is a classic. Another one that I remember from around this would be later, was Piranha, the original Piranha. So of course you got Piranha is actually I guess that's after Jaws, and I don't even know that we need to get into Jaws, but I mean Jaws is not, I mean Jaws is Jaws. First of all, I say I'm not going to get into Jaws, and then I start talking about Jaws.
You sort of have to mention Jaws, right?
Here's what I'll say. Number one, I think Jaws is a perfect movie. I mean, as far as plot, as far as pacing, as far as every single thing, like it's perfect. Like you can take that and then people have just copy it and you go, well, that's a movie. You go,
even the old series copied it. It copied itself many times.
Yeah, that's true. Jaws 2 is basically Jaws, you know. I think what happens with these movies, the ones that are successful, is they make it to where you're afraid of these things, right? So, like, I remember when I saw Jaws, I was scared to take a bath. I kind of want to get in a bathtub, because Jaws might get me, So, so it was definitely effective. But there was other ones, around that time, because that kind of started the whole, the rebirth, right, of all those movies. So that's where you get Piranha. I think Piranha is Joe Dante. I think it was Joe Dante's first film. Before, maybe not his first film, but one of his early films. So, before he went on to do all the things he did, Gremlins and all his movies. But Piranha was the same type of thing. Now, I wasn't too worried. I live in Oklahoma. It's not a big piranha state, so I wasn't too worried about
same
that.
Here.
But then again, I was afraid about a shark in my bathtub, so who knows where a piranha could get,
The previews for this were outstanding. I will say that because when I was a kid, I saw because I didn't know what a piranha was. No one knows what that was. And so when you see suckers like
put them on the
fishing
map
or whatever, you're like, oh, look, this is a sucker. Oh, crap, killer fish. What the heck's that? And then you see what they do, and it scared the crap out of me. I will say, I've never seen this movie. I know about it all too well, but I've never watched it. I never took the notion to see it because it kind of looked real creepy to me as a kid. And just never what I went back to. But much like it is a Jaws knockoff, but also much like Jaws, killer shark, right? Hey, piranha, they'll bite you. A school will bite you. You've heard the old things like, a school of piranha can consume 100 pounds of meat in 15 seconds. Or I don't know if that's true. It might be,
Right.
But it's still a creepy concept to be eaten alive by a bunch of fish. So that's all I needed to see, man.
File me under don't want to find out.
No, you got that right. I'm glad I live in a state that I think piranha are saltwater fish, right? So we don't have to worry.
Yeah. It's mostly, I think, an Amazon kind of thing. Now, around that same time, we get alligator, which, of course, like when I was a kid, I heard all the urban legends that there was that time in New York where someone had a pet alligator and they flushed it down the toilet and it got in the sewer and it grew. Well, this is basically that movie, right? The alligator is, that's it, right? It's in the sewer, it grows. There's some pretty leaps of faith in alligator. Again, it's one that's a fun watch. It didn't make me necessarily more afraid of. I'm more afraid of real alligators than I was of the alligator in the movie. You know what I mean?
They all scare me. It doesn't have to be a super version. It's like sharks.
No, I've been to the zoo and seen them throw meat down there in the alligator pit, and they all rip it and twist and all that. And that's enough for me. I don't need of course, the one in the movie, I think there's a scene where the guys are coming out of the sewer and the alligator climbs up the ladder after him. So I don't need one that could climb ladders. But
I will say alligators do have one thing on the sharks and the piranha. They can literally get out of the water. You got that going for you.
Well, we saw that with Lake Placid.
Yeah, no, that I didn't. I never saw alligator, but Lake Placid I did see. That had Betty White in it, as I recall. Wasn't that the one that had her in it?
Where she was feeding it cows after a while.
Yeah,
and that's Lake Placid is a. I'm normally not a big horror comedy guy. Like, I like my comedy and I like my horror, but I don't like it in the same cup. You know what I mean? But Lake Placid was the right mixture. You know what I mean? It was kind of sarcastic. It was funny, but then there was plenty of good scares and stuff in Lake Placid. I actually, a friend of mine won tickets to go see Lake Placid, off the radio, and we got to go see a premiere of Lake Placid. And when we got there, they gave us a poster. So I had a Lake Placid poster on my wall for a long time.
I thought Betty White made this film. Made it.
Absolutely.
She was the star of this. And by the way, she was old then, So, but this is a goofy movie. I saw this in the theater. I don't know why. It's one of those. I didn't think it was the best, but I did think it was the worst. And it had enough funny parts and interesting parts that. But I'm kind of like, we talked about what really scared us, what doesn't scare me generally. are killer animals that I don't have daily exposure to. So if I don't see Jaws or piranhas or alligators walking around, I feel like I'm doing pretty good.
Well, I feel like no matter what happens in my life, I can avoid great white sharks.
Yeah.
Like I just feel like there's not going to be one, like land shark from Saturday Night Live. Like it's not going to show up at my house. You know what I mean? Like all I got to do is not go where sharks go. Right. Yeah. But 70s had a lot of movies where they turned things that you could run into in your life into killer creatures. I'll tell you a couple of them. One of them was a little movie called Ants. And so these were not the giant killer ants from them. These were normal old ants. And if I remember right, they were next to this, it was like on the beach at Florida or something, and they were doing construction. And so when they were doing construction, it disturbed the ants.
Yeah,
it woke them up. And then you're like, what's an ant or what's two ants? But then it'd be like a million ants, and they'd come get a guy. They'd swarm him, and I remember all those. It's kind of like Children of the Corn, right? Like after 3 kids, they could probably take me. So I don't know what the ratio of Flacks to ants is, but there's some number of ants where at some point, there's I think we're showing a clip right now. This is the ants that are coming out of the little. They had the tunnel and. So, like I said, I can avoid great white sharks. I can't avoid ants.
Yeah.
I got ants.
Ants and bees. Someone in the chat mentioned that a movie about killer bees. And I
swarm.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen a couple of those, including a British movie about a beekeeper who has killer bees. And that's no way to go. So I agree. Getting fire anted to death or beed to death, no good. I both those. So yeah, those are just creepy. I agree with that.
There was a whole time, like during our childhood, we're the same age, where they were like, well, you guys have done screwed up the planet, and here's what's going to happen to you now. And it was like, I didn't do it. But then they were like, well, now you're getting African bees. And it was inevitable. They're like, someday you're going to die from a bee attack. I was like, well, great. That's one more thing to worry about.
It's funny. Every year in real life, you'd hear, this is the one. They're coming up from their Africanized bees coming up through Guadalcanal. It's like, what? And they never quite get here, thankfully, these Africanized bees.
No. I figure it can't be that hard to distract a bee. Just leave some honey somewhere around the Panama Canal or... somewhere on the way in between here and there, we can throw them off the track or something. But
here's a thought: wait till they try to go across the Rockies. That'll take care of them bees good and proper. Unless they're snow bees from Bingo, they're in deep trouble.
I'll tell you one other thing that most people can't avoid is dogs.
Yes,
and Cujo was one of the. I mean, Cujo is really the flip of the on a coin, the heads and the tails. Like if heads is Old Yeller, tails is Cujo.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Stephen King thing, and again, it's one of those stories where it's like dogs. It's man's best friend. Everybody's had a dog. Everybody has a dog they liked, and Cujo. And I typically do say this. I think that most of Stephen King's stuff is scarier on the page than on the screen. A lot of it just doesn't translate. I think last week I mentioned Maximum Overdrive. Like, that's a scary story, where all the household appliances are coming after you and stuff. But I mean, on a movie, when a toaster attacks you, it ain't that scary.
I
it
love
just doesn't.
That film, though. I mean, it's a
fun film.
It's so funny.
Yeah, but it's not scary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned Pet Sematary last week, but there's just a lot of Stephen King stuff that just isn't, on the screen wasn't that good. I will say, and I want to make sure I get them all, but the mom in Cujo, which when I was a kid, I didn't put, a lot of times I didn't put act like when I saw an actor in one movie, I didn't realize that they were somebody else in another movie, you know?
Yeah.
But the mom in Cujo is Dee Wallace. And Dee Wallace had a long acting career, but she had about 5 years where, a couple of years before Cujo, Dee Wallace was the mom in E.T. And, a year or two before she was the mom in E.T., she was the mom in The Howling.
Yeah, she was over the
and,
map.
I think there's one other one that I can't think of off the top of my head. Maybe Last House on the Left? Maybe she was in, I don't know, it was one of those, like a 70s one. But Dee Wallace, man, has been, I think she was Rob Zombie used her in a couple of his, no, The Hills Have Eyes. That's what it was. The Hills Have Eyes she was in. So,
hilarious story. The creepy mutant-looking guy in that, the bald guy. I ended up, I was at Scarefest in Lexington, Kentucky. I hit the bathroom, was up at the urinal, don't take care of my business. And my eyes crept over, and that guy was doing his business in the urinal next to me. He looked exactly
Are you serious?
like the movie. And you talk about, I almost had to go to the stall. I was like, oh my God, what a freak. Yeah, he was, I guess he was at the con, but it scared the crap out of me.
I remember when he was in Weird Science. Remember the mutants
scene.
when they break in? And dude is like, lovely party.
I like the guy. I hope this won't affect. I don't want this to affect my teaching job. I like that guy.
Yeah. So lots of
Cujo. Before you move on from that.
Yeah.
I think you did this too. I used to deliver a lot of pizza. All right.
Oh yeah.
And so I dealt with many a dog back in the day. Okay. And so I had seen this movie. And so, what used to get me were Doberman pinchers. They'd scare the crap out of me.
Yeah. But you probably saw The Omen.
Yeah, I did. And so, but I also saw this, and I thought to myself, because I went to this guy's house that had a dog that was probably twice as big as Cujo that liked pizza. And man, every time I'd go there, this thing would try to kill me. And man, this movie I had flashbacks over and over from this movie. I thought this was a pretty creepy one from King here. I approve of this one.
Cujo is a good horror movie. Like I said, there's a lot of his movies that are good, like the early stuff like Firestarter and Carrie and stuff like that. They're good horror movies, but they didn't scare me. But Cujo scared me.
Yeah, I added one to your list here as I was looking over it. I think it sort of qualifies in this list. It's a Rutger Hauer guilty pleasure of mine from 1992, and it's called Split Second. And the reason I included it in this list is because it takes place in a not too distant future where the ice caps have melted and most of the UK is flooded. And so it's like there's canals that crop everywhere. And Rutger Hauer plays, guess what? A hard-boiled cop who's got nothing to lose. And they give him this British partner who's just like a British geek. And slowly, Rutger Hauer is this guy up to speed. He starts giving the guy a ton of candy bars and coffee, and the guy's walking around with a bunch of guns. But the whole premise of this is they're fighting a giant, radioactive, satanic, mutant rat that lives in the sewers. And
that checks a lot of boxes.
It checks all the boxes. And so if you think, what's Rutger Hauer going to do? It's exactly what you think he's going to do. And I'm going to mention the ending of this just because it's from 92. You've probably seen it. But at the end, guess what? He's fighting the giant, satanic, radioactive death rat. And the rat's thinks to the rat's like, I got him. And then Rutger Hauer literally reaches into the rat and rips out its heart. It's the best thing ever because it's Rutger Hauer. That's all you need to know. So if you want a guilty pleasure that's got plenty of creepiness in it, because when a giant satanic radioactive rat kills a sucker, he doesn't just shoot him, if you know what I mean. He gives him the business, Rob. But I always enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I think it fits into the weird, creepy monster movie genre.
Yeah, not to go off on a tangent, but Rutger Hauer was in a lot of, a lot of good movies. Of course, I think I first knew him from Blade Runner, but The Hitcher is one.
Blind Justice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff. He was just in so many of that era of movies. I know he was in Lady Hawk, which I did a podcast on one time, and I said I'd never seen it, and people raked me over the coals. They were like, "You never saw Lady Hawk?" I was like, "How did I know?"
I like that better than Red Sonja. I will say that. So.
I was in there. All right, so here's a little thing that I want to ask you some questions. You're going to answer on a scale of 1 to 10.
Okay.
And then we can talk about movies or anything, and so we can talk about them as little or as much as you want to talk about them. But the question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how scary do you find the following things in movies?
Okay.
So the first one, since we already talked about haunted houses a little bit, the first one on a scale of 1 to 10, how scary do you find ghosts?
I'd say if 10's super scary and 1 is not the least bit scary, I'd put them somewhere in the like 6-ish range. Just your average ghost.
Yeah, I always again, if ghosts, like if they're the old school, like the woo, that kind of ghost, I'm not that afraid.
Yeah.
When they could start, throwing stuff at me or pushing me off balconies or something, then that number goes up a little bit.
I kind of like ghosts. I like ghost movies where the ghost isn't really evil. They're just pissed off that they got killed stupidly, and they're like trying to let you know what happened. You know what I mean? I kind of like those. Like they want you to get vengeance for them. I think that's pretty good.
Call that the Beetlejuice effect.
That's right.
All right. A scale of 1 to 10. How scary are werewolves?
Werewolves? Now, well, listen, you mentioned Wolfen a minute ago, and American Werewolf in London's another one that are astronomically creepy. In fact, I would put American Werewolf in London up in the list of more scary films, but also funny. It was a real strange one, wasn't it? But I mean, Wolfen wasn't funny. Well, a little bit, but I mean, they're both hardcore werewolf movies. And of course, if you go back and watch like The Lion Chaney and stuff like that, I mean, there's some good stuff in there, But I mean, now when you go back, and the thing about the Universal monsters was when you go back and watch them now, like they've been parodied and ripped off and tinkered with so much that they've lost their effectiveness to a certain degree, I think. But even those were sort of scary. But yeah, I think werewolves would be more like a 7 or 8.
When I was a kid, I remember when American Werewolf in London was on HBO, and my dad said, he said, you don't have to, like, I don't want you to watch this whole movie, but I want you to come out of your room when this scene's on. So he called me out, and I watched the transformation scene in American Werewolf in London, which, up until that point, like, transformations kind of happened off screen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or slowly fading shots or something like that. But a lot of time, the original Wolfman, Lon Chaney be gone, and he'd come back and he'd have one, that thing. But they were like it was painfully on screen, like every second of that transformation. And I've told people before, like, the other kids in my neighborhood, like, their heroes were, I don't know, like Roger Starbuck at the time, or, Babe Ruth, maybe, somebody like, and I was like, Rick Baker is my hero. Rick Baker being the guy who did the effects, and he became for a while, he was the go-to werewolf guy, and then he became, he kind of was the go-to for a lot of stuff, but anything with hair. So he did.
That's me, Al.
He did. Yeah. He did the werewolf in American Werewolf in London. He did. Famously, he did his studio did the cantina scene in Star Wars. But then Michael Jackson saw American Werewolf in London and said, "I want to make this video called Thriller, and I want to turn it into a werewolf. So get me the guy that did that." So Rick Baker did. The Michael Jackson's werewolf thing in Thriller. Off the top of my head, then he kind of became, he was a gorilla guy. He did the gorilla in the King Kong remake, which is like 76. He did he was not only did he make the gorilla things, he played the gorilla. He played the gorilla in what was the movie with Lily Tomlin where she shrunk, The Incredible Shrinking Woman?
Oh gosh, yeah, I remember that.
He was the gorilla, and then he did the gorilla, or he did Bigfoot in Harry and the Hendersons. I mean, so that kind of became his go-to thing was gorillas and Bigfoots and things like that. And he's actually in he did all the aliens in the Men in Black movies. And then right around that time, he kind of retired from the business. He said, you know what, CGI pushed me out of the business. He said, I'm a practical effect dude, and I did it for a long time. And he made latex masks, and then the business kind of changed, which was kind of a bummer.
I'm pretty sure he won an Oscar for that transformation scene. It is much like Exorcist was. That's a scene that changed the way things were going to go. It never was the same because he'd raised the bar. Listen, we've all watched a million shows that had transformations in it, and they duck behind a table or whatever. There's a very famous episode of The Twilight Zone where this guy turns into the devil, and as he walks from behind these pillars, he becomes more and more devilish. It was a very cute trick, don't get me wrong, but I mean, you're right, this was a full-bore, full-on transformation that was miraculous to watch.
Yeah. I mean, every step of the nose, the snout stretching, the hands, and then just the sheer pain the guy was in going through that physical transformation. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, Aaron, how scary are mummies?
Mummies, I've never been that scared of them, because again, this is something that's you're not often going to come across, frankly.
It's like a great white shark to me, yes.
Yeah, but I will say and I didn't really get into the new mummy shows that were out, the ones that had Brendan Fraser in them.
Right.
Much like everything in the old ones, they built a lot of suspense in those. The Mummy got a good run back in the day, but I mean, it didn't do much for me. Plus, it usually look like they're slow. So even I might be outrun a Mummy. So I put those down as under 5, probably 4.
Yeah, like I said, it's like a great white shark. Like, to get attacked by a mummy, you got to go steal stuff from a mummy's tomb.
Yeah.
Like, that seems to be, that's not going to happen in my life, so.
The makeup job in the old show, though, was, that's one thing, of course, again, in fact, it's on the screen now. Karloff was a genius.
Yes.
And the makeup people did a real good job getting him and all those guys the makeup back in like that era is quite astounding, and it looks real well in black and white too, and really they never improved on it because there's always so much you could do. It's a guy with bandages, or maybe they're sort of coming off, but if you use any monster right, you can do something with them, but I haven't seen anything particular. I guess Bubba Hotep was pretty good. That didn't have a mummy in it though. I guess it did. It had a mummy, so that was sort of scary.
Yeah. And by the way, you're dating yourself when you say the new Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser, because they remade them yet again. They had the one a few years ago with Tom Cruise. So they remade
I forgot about that. Yeah, I totally forgot about those. You're right.
I know. That's when we're old is when we say the new ones, and it's 20 years old. It's a lot of our life. All right, scale of 1 to 10. How scary are vampires?
Vampires are up there more because vampires have a lot of jack, I've seen a lot of good vampire flicks and over the years, so I would say they're probably more like an 8 or even sometimes even a 9. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of vampire movies that aren't that scary, that are still good. Like Lost Boys, it's a good flick, but it's not that scary. Near Dark is good, but it's not that scary. Shadow the Vampire, that's pretty scary and is good. That's another. I think it's. Have you seen that one?
Yes.
It's where effectively the premise of the film is they get an actual vampire to play a vampire in an old silent movie, and he goes around killing the cast and the crew. And he'll ask the director, because the director's in on it, be like, "Listen, do you need the sound guy anymore?" And he'd be like, "No, I don't need him. You go kill the sound guy." And I always thought that was a really good flick. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. Did you have some favorites in the area?
Well, one of the ones that one of my favorite ones was John Carpenter's Vampires.
See, I like that too, and a lot of people didn't get into that. I thought it was a real entertaining film.
I thought it was a good idea. It was like they were, it was the guys, they were going after vampires for like a religious reason, right? So, but they were like a hit squad, but they're, talking about practical effects. There's that party at the beginning where they're all partying, and that vampire shows up and splits that dude in half, vertically.
Yeah.
He's slowing right down the middle, and then he does that, like where he splits like that. That was a good scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, those vampires weren't messing around.
It was a different slant too. It was almost like, I don't want to say it was like, in some ways it had more to do with like Blade than anything else. I mean, they were out there to take these guys out in a modern way, which I thought that was kind of cool. I liked it, but a lot of my friends thought that movie sucked, and a lot of people just flat out didn't like it. But I enjoyed it. I like John Carpenter though. That's just me.
When I was a kid, I actually tried to read the original Dracula. I don't know if you've ever tried to read it, but Dracula, the novel, is not written like a novel. It's like correspondence letters from all the different characters. So you're reading the people's letters, like, oh, I'm at this. I arrived in Transylvania and this and that. It was a really difficult book to read as a kid. But then you had the movie, which, by the way, I didn't know this, but, like every kid, like I'm sure you, at some point, you're probably a vampire for Halloween. I was a vampire. Like I think every kid's at some point is a vampire. You get the plastic Halloween teeth. And then you learn how to speak like a vampire, and you go, I want to suck your blood, that sort of thing. And I didn't realize this, but that's because he was Hungarian. That's how Bela Lugosi talked. Yeah. So that's what, we're not all doing a vampire voice. We're all doing Bela Lugosi. I didn't know that.
I love Bela. Of course, if you've ever seen the film Ed Wood, which is, if you haven't, stop watching us and go watch it now. It's one of my all-time favorite films, but Bela Lugosi's portrayed it quite coolly. But I mean, that's sort of the way Bela was, from what I've heard. He was just sort of towards the end of his career, he was sort of ostracized, a drug addict, and all these problems. But early in his career, when Dracula was around and when they would take that on tour and stuff, he was a big player. The women loved him, like men feared him. He was a really cool character because that was a new thing back in those days. But I love his accent too. Think about, what if he'd been from like the South or something? We could have all been like, "Hey man, I'm gonna suck y'all's blood," something like that could have happened.
I'm gonna get you back yonder. Yeah, it would have been a whole different thing. We would have been.
While we're on vampires, I want to throw in a couple here because, one of these has been marginalized in the last few years, and it angers me. There's a great book called I Am Legend. It's a tremendous book, and they've made several films on it. I think one was called The Omega Man, and the one I've got it now is The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. But the movie I Am Legend, that had a Will Smith in it, which another one of the things I loved. He went to crap on, which seems to be his thing he does to me. He takes the stuff out like it murders, and this was another murder. I hated this movie. Hated. It wasn't like the book. The premise in the book, where everyone in the world's basically been absorbed through this hideous outbreak, and they've all become vampires, and this guy's trying to live in that world. It was a real creepy premise. It's what I think you absolutely should check out in the field, because I thought it was a real good movie. And then another one that I thought was really good, and I'm going to put it in the vampire section because I think it mostly fits. This is one that, again, it's another one a lot of people don't like. It's called Lair of the White Worm. It's a British film. Have you seen this one?
So I saw this was on your list. Yeah. I will tell you that this is one of my buddy Jeff's favorite horror movies. He's always mentioned it. For some reason, I thought this is from the 50s. I had never seen it, and since it was on your list, I watched it last night for the very first time.
Oh my gosh! Well, I've got to ask then, Flack, having not seen this before, what did you think of Lair of the White Worm?
I thought there was a lot of references to the old white worm. So there's a lot. You know, it's definitely has an old. I can see why you would like it because it definitely has that old, not old school vibe, but what's the word I'm looking for? Like the old town, like it's like the ancient, these old stories of a dragon or a worm or something, and then of course it turns out to be able to manifest itself. It's a woman who's kind of eternal. It was made it's an 80s horror movie, so you're gonna get lots of topless girls in it.
Yeah, the premise of this movie is basically like there's a sort of a cult in an area, or really it's just one priestess who's basically going around and getting people. And what I like about the film is this is an early Hugh Grant film, I might add. And what I like about it is that you never know where it's going. It's an odd film. It has a little comedy. It's got a little sexiness. It's got a little sacrilegiousness in various parts of it. But I think it's a real winner. If you haven't seen it before, I think you would super dig it. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and finish up our list here of what we think is scary and not scary. We'll be back in 2 shakes. Hang loose, everybody.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
That's right, Jim. We're here on the grounds where the most recent Mothman sighting has occurred, and I gotta say, it's pretty creepy out here. It was last seen around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, terrorizing 2 elderly ladies. The poor old ladies were just trying to enjoy their bingo night when Mothman appeared out of nowhere. Oh, shit.
Do not fear the Mothman. Please leave all windows and doors unlocked when you come to visit Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
I was in the middle of that, and I heard someone knocking at the door, which is why I had to mute. And the reason I opened the door, there was a gosh darn zombie.
Yeah, they get around. They're actually a lot of them are going to be running for office here in a few months. So unfortunately.
So what do you think about zombies on a scale of 1? And zombies are one of those things. I mean, it's a big list, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how creepy are zombies?
Mixed bag, really, because really, I mean, the range of movie with zombies in it goes all over the map. I mean, in all honesty, there are some. I mean,
hi everyone.
There are some great ones. There are some really good ones, and then there are some god awful ones. You know what I mean? Like for example, I mean, if you go back to Night of the Living Dead, that's a stone classic, in my opinion.
Oh man!
And they did a lot. They did a lot with what they had. We all know the way that was shot. We all know the budget it had. We all know, but it broke. Again, we talked about it before with The Exorcist. This broke the mold as to what a zombie film is, and what you could do. And it was awesome. It's an awesome, creepy film. They got it right. On the flip side, like the sequels to this, And I know some people hold them in high regard, and I'm not going to badmouth them, but I didn't. The whole thing, like where hordes and hordes of zombies trap people in certain areas, stuff like that, it has to be really cleverly done for me to be interested in it. And for the most part, most movies don't do it for me. Now, I will say, I did like Zombieland, I think it was called, which was sort of a comedy zombie flick. I thought that was a real fun movie, the first one. Or Shaun of the Dead. I thought that was out the comedy. There's a lot of comedy that can be derived from the zombie movies. But I mean, there aren't too many. I guess another one, that would sort of fall. I'm trying to think. I don't know if we could say this would fall in to the zombie movie, but I guess it would, which is Carnival of Souls, which I mentioned to you a while back. That's another great film of the year. It's more dreamy than most zombie movies, but it seems like the dead are after the girl in that movie. So if you haven't seen Carnival of Souls, that's another one. You hear a lot of people mocking it or whatever, but it's really good. And for years, no one knew what I was talking about, but it sort of had a resurgence the last, 10 years as people started figuring it out. What do you think in the zombie genre, Flack?
Well, first of all, let me tell you about Carnival of Souls. This is a great movie. It's kind of has that same thing that Jacob's Ladder has. What's that called? An Occurrence on Owl Bridge or whatever that is.
It's on Owl Creek Bridge.
Owl Creek, yeah. It's those movies where a whole movie happens and then we kind of find out towards the end maybe what we think is happening. It's what do they call it? Unreliable narrator, where what we think is happening is not what's really happening. But Carnival of Souls is definitely a classic. But you probably know this, but there's a trivia fact about Carnival of Souls. When they published the movie on the actual print, they forgot to put copyright. And so when they the minute they released the movie, it went into public domain because there was no copyright notice on the film. So that's why it's one of those movies that's always in the dollar bin. It's always, because it is public domain. They did not have a copyright on the movie. I got my DVD copy of this a few years ago. I went to Dollar Tree around Halloween time, and I was looking, and there was a DVD, and I think it had like the ape, like those bad 30s horror, like the ape and the great ape or Ape Escapes. It was like 2 movies on there, and it was $1 for 2 movies. And I was like, what is that? And I picked it up, and then behind that there was another one, and it had 2 different movies. And I started going through there, and there were altogether 16 different DVDs in there, 32 horror movies. But each one that had 2 movies was $1. So I spent $16 and got all those old 30s and 40s black and white movies. And Carnival of Souls was one of the ones that was in that pack. So that's where I got my copy. But yeah, what a deal. That's a good one. I'd forgotten about like Shaun of the Dead and some of those other ones that were funny.
Yeah.
Of course, Night of the Living Dead is do a whole podcast on it, but yeah, it's such a landmark for a lot of reasons. Of course, there's like this racial angle, where the hero is a black man, and then they're like, they don't want to follow his lead, even though he has the best idea to get them out of this situation. And when you watch the original Night of the Living Dead, at the end of it, it has like this really tragic ending. But if you go into it thinking, like there is a solution, like if these people had worked together and this guy had done this differently, and there's all these things, they could have got out of it. But they're not working together, and they won't listen to the right people and stuff. So, but there's 100 million bazillion sequels. Some authorized and most of them not authorized to those. The Dawn of the Dead was the one where they were all trying to get to him in the mall,
Yeah.
And that one's okay, and I've read that that's supposed to be more of a take on like consumerism, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know that I don't need a lesson with my zombies. You know what I mean?
It's
like
tale.
it's like people tell me, you know, hey, this is how much fiber's in your Lucky Charms. Like, I ain't eating Lucky Charms to make sure I'm getting all my daily vitamins, you know? So, and then Return of the Living Dead. That was a big one when I was a kid. It was always on HBO. And of course, that was kind of that black humor kind of stuff, you know. There's always that thing where they've got one canister of the gas that brought the zombies to life, and then somebody breaks the canister and it goes out there. But there was I mean, there's been great zombie movies, and then there's just some really, really stinkers. I know you're not a fan of Trauma.
I hate those guys so much.
when I first got my DVD player, like in 1999, I discovered Trauma, and I went on eBay and I found this lot of like 50 Trauma DVDs or something for like $100, and I bought it. So like I had like 3 DVDs, like I had Ghostbusters and Lethal Weapon 4 and something else, Stepmother or something like that. And then I had this giant stack of Trauma movies.
What was that stupid thing? With the janitor. What was that?
Toxic Avenger.
The Toxic Avenger. Yes. That was their guy.
And there's a new one coming out this year. They said they're making a new Toxic Avenger. But one of the first ones of that was a movie called Redneck Zombies. And let me tell you, I mean, it literally. Next time we're at Boat Fest, if like me, you, and Bo were to go out in West Virginia with a camcorder and just like stick some oatmeal on our face, we can make a better movie than Redneck Zombies. It's terrible. It's really, really bad. But yeah, lots of good stuff in zombie movies. I would say zombies. I got to throw this out. There's a movie called Zombie. In the U.S., it was called Zombie. It was actually overseas. It was released as Zombie 2. And it was like an unofficial sequel. They marketed it as a sequel to Night of the Living Dead, but that was, I think it's Argento. It's Italian, you know, horror. And that is, that's a pretty good zombie movie. I mean, that's like it's like Night of the Living Dead, where you can go, hey, this is a platform, and then a lot of stuff is going to build on top of that, you know.
Have you ever seen or heard of a movie called Night of the Creeps? Night of the Creeps, where a spaceship, I believe it was, dropped something in a graveyard, and it caused these like space alien jacked up worms to infect the dead. It's a goofy flick. But I remember it was like, this was the big deal when I was a teenager in high school. Everybody was like, oh, we got to see Night of the Creeps. And it's a stupid movie, but it's good. And it's got 2 different endings I know of. And one of the endings is one of the all-time great endings in it. But it's a fun, campy load of garbage movie that I would say would fall into the zombie category. If you're looking for something to watch, you could do worse. And like I said, it's got some funniness in it too. It's got some people that you might even know. There's a couple semi-stars in there.
Yeah. So I put some other stuff on here. Unless you got big thoughts about aliens or Bigfoot or kids or whatever, we'll kind of move past some of that. But one thing I did want to ask you about is kind of a genre, but also a plot device. And so we can talk about it in general, or if you have some, some memories of movies or whatever. But in general, like on a 1 to 10, how scary do you find these found footage movies?
They're way up there. I will say. I don't.
Yeah.
I've seen. I mean, we mentioned last week the Blair Witch Trial or Blair Witch Project, which I thought was quite creepy, if I'm honest. I saw a movie called I think it was called the Thin Man or the Tall Man. It was something.
Oh yeah, Tall Man. Yeah.
And I thought, I told Tree, I said, listen, I don't want to go see this movie. I don't want to see something that's going to like disturb me for years. She's like, nah, it'll be fine. And then it did. So that one, I won't go see that again. That's another one I put on the list. And we mentioned, anything like that where like you could come across footage. It's it could happen. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So it does. I'd say that's way up the list. That's an 8 or so for me.
Yeah, depends on how they're done. Blair Witch was, I just saw a meme pop up on Twitter. Somebody posted this, and they said, the meme said, nobody who saw Blair Witch in 1999 thought it was real footage. Stop saying that. And I'm here to tell you that is wrong.
That's 100%
that is 100%
wrong.
I saw Blair Witch opening night in the theater. It had this build up, and if you remember, if you were there was a History Channel special, and it was called like Sticks and Stones or something like that, but they ran it on History Channel, and it was like a real documentary, I mean real in air quotes, about the Blair Witch.
Yeah.
And so they ran that on TV, and so people thought it was a real thing.
Yeah.
And we went to the thing, and I am here to tell you, like this is not secondhand. Like, I was there. People poured out of the theater, and first of all, everybody was like, what just happened?
Yeah.
What happened? And then you're like, the witch, she makes you stand in the corner. They're like, oh my God, the witch got the guy, And people were arguing. Like, the whole theater, I don't know how many people are in a theater, a couple hundred people. We all moved to the sidewalk outside the theater. There's 200 people. We were all standing there on the sidewalk, and we were talking to strangers, and they're like, what, was that real? Was that not real? What did they do? Why did they get rid of the map? Why would they,
I can't even imagine seeing this in a theater, because, like I said, I watched it at home where it was triple creepy. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And, the ending is so puzzling. Like, I watched the ending 2 or 3 times and I couldn't stomach it anymore. I was getting too nervous. But I can imagine how this would go. But I think this is one of those films that's like, the quality of enjoyment you get from it depends on the amount of that you invest into it. If you're
Sure.
paying attention and you think that you understand the plight of these guys and what or I think part of it also might be like, have I been lost in the woods, which I have, not a fun thing. And then you think to yourself, someone coming after me in the woods, that's worse, not good. The way, and it ramps up the tension expertly. I mean, they made this movie for nothing, and it was, I mean, it's probably one of the biggest ratios of money making of all time. And you're right. This thing had a buzz that no one ever heard. And you're right. To all the people that say, no one bought that, wrong. Absolutely wrong. Now, there are people who tell you now, I got it figured out. But, I mean, when I watched it, up until a certain point, I thought to myself, man, this is one freaky thing. And they built it it's very brilliantly put together with, the whole concept. Because that's another thing. We hadn't seen those kind of films that much. And so that made a big difference.
Right. I'm going to ask you, this is a film I'm going to bet money you haven't seen, but it was called Jersey Devil. Have you seen this movie?
I think I did. I believe it or not, just because I'm from New Jersey. And so that's sort of one of my things. But I'll be honest with you, I don't remember anything about it.
It is a found footage film that is very, very similar to the Blair Witch. It's about a bunch of kids.
I have seen this, yes. I absolutely have.
They're doing research, and they go out and somebody gets killed, or the party gets killed, and they find the footage, right? And the plot device, which is not exactly 100% technical how it worked, but the tape that had the killer of the Jersey Devil was erased in static, and so as they're going through the movie, they're trying to recover the footage, and there's another guy working on the film with him, and so eventually they recover enough of it, and then they play it, and we realize that it's not the Jersey Devil that killed the people. It was the guy that had been working with him. But it is almost beat for beat. It's very, very similar to the Blair Witch, and it came out a year after the Blair Witch, and everyone called it a ripoff, but in reality, it was made before the Blair Witch. It predates the Blair Witch by about a year and a half, but it didn't get wide distribution. So nobody had seen it. And then once Blair Witch came out and those types of movies took off, then then it got released, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's a ripoff of Blair Witch," but it was actually first. And
it's funny, I never knew this was even released in the theater. That's what threw me. I must have. I'm pretty sure this is what I downloaded some time ago. And I will say, there's a couple. There's some. If you're into the Jersey Devil at all, which it is pretty fascinating legend. There's some really good documentaries and whatnot on him. You know, the funny thing with these found footage movies, they, of course, once you made one, everyone wanted in on the act. And this is sort of out of school, since we talked about it last week, but there was a show that was based on found footage called Freaky Links that I used to watch. And where they, did you ever see Freaky Links? It was, I
don't know if I saw it.
I enjoyed it quite a bit, and it didn't last long. It was in the Fox Spot of Death on Friday nights before X-Files. Same place that everything dies. Firefly died, Briscoe County Jr. died, this died, everything dies. But the whole premise of this thing was they videotaped everything, and, you know, the whole nine yards. They used the web extensively because it was real early for that. You know, so that's sort of what these things birthed. You know, a lot
was
of
was it fictional?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, it wasn't like a documentary.
Look into it. I thought it was called Freaky Links. I've got a Freaky Links T-shirt somewhere in the house. I'm probably the only one. But yeah, found footage. It's near the top of the list right there.
Yeah. When it's done right, you know, it's good. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. We went to. You remember there was a huge build-up for Cloverfield.
Yes.
When that was going to come out, and that was going to be a found footage thing. They kept showing this scene of everybody running across whatever it was, the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever, and then the Statue of Liberty's head came falling down or whatever. And so I told my wife, I go, this thing is going to be huge. This movie's going to be huge. And so we pre-bought tickets, like the kind where you have like an assigned seat or whatever.
Yeah. Like all tickets
to go
are now.
Yeah. Right. To go midnight, opening night, and we went, and there was only one other couple there. There was only two of us. I was so surprised, but it was like the Thursday night at midnight, so it's like a work night kind of thing, you know. And it was, you know, if you remember, the first 10, 15 minutes of that is just shaky cam, the whole thing, you know.
Oh, I remember it quite well.
Yeah, and so we're watching the movie. And then the only other couple they were right behind us, like one row behind us. And about 10 minutes into it, the lady spills her drink. It's like you pour your drink out on the ground, like, you know?
Yeah.
And then they got up and left, and then I smelled it, and I go, oh, that wasn't her drink. Like, she had actually gotten sick from all the shaky cam.
Yeah. Well,
and so
that's exactly
it was just us and that lady's puke.
That's audit puke, but this is one of it might be the only movie I ever saw in my whole life that made me nauseous, and I've negever had that happen. You know, I'll tell you another one that did it. That did it after I saw this. I saw it's another Stephen King one, and it had like Cthulhu creatures. And I'm trying to think of the name of this thing. But it was another one that had like a lot of handy cam and shaking around and whatnot. And man, it made me sick. But this was the king right here. This thing, I don't get car sick. I don't get seasick. But this one did it to me. It must have hit me wrong. And so I can absolutely see why that happened. I wasn't overly impressed with this movie, to be honest with you, because they showed so little of what was going on. Then they went to that whole area in the sewer part where that's sort of secondary crap. I want to see the big deal.
The kind of dog little things or whatever. Yeah.
No, I'd rather have not gotten that part in. But yeah, it still was. It was an intriguing concept. It's like, what happens when Godzilla comes to your town? Well, bad crap. That's what.
Bad stuff. You know. Okay, so let's see. I'm jumping around a little bit. I'm kind of sent Aaron an outline, which is like my head. It's just like ADD captured. In text format, but I want to get to, tonight is Friday the 13th, and obviously we've got Halloween coming up, and so I made a list of some of the scariest movies that I've to me are some of the scary, now not necessarily my favorite horror movies, but the ones that kind of scared me the most. So I don't know. I could run down these. Maybe we could talk about these, and then if you have some that you think are super scary, we could throw those in as well. Does that sound good?
Yeah, go. That sounds good to me.
Okay, so the first one I put on the list was Halloween. Halloween, for me, it checks all those boxes. Obviously, you know, all the classic 80s slasher movies have you know, things. Obviously they're classics for a reason, right? But Halloween is a classic because if you've ever watched the movie, you know, he's evil incarnate. You know, Michael Myers doesn't have a motive, and I mean, not originally, or not much of one, let's say, and you know, the fact that he's wearing this mask makes him this emotionless killer. So you don't see a guy who's angry, you don't see a guy who's laughing, you don't see a guy who's crazy. You just see this emotionless mask, you know. And one of the things I think that I always find scary in movies is when people get attacked in their homes. You know, I think homes are kind of your safe place. It's your haven. You know, at night, you lock the deadbolt, or you lock the door, and you go, nobody's going to get me. You know, I'm safe in my house. So when the monster shows up in your house, when you can't, you know, and you're running through your house or whatever, like that's the stuff that nightmares are made of. So that was one of the ones I put on. Are you a fan of Halloween, the series, the first movie?
Oh yeah, the first one's is a classic. Creepy as all get out. Jamie Lee Curtis double fine in that, by the way. It's funny, the Rob Zombie remake of the first movie, a lot of people didn't like it, where it showed more in the background of the kid and whatnot, but actually I thought that kind of fleshed things out quite nicely, frankly. And I'm not the biggest fan of zombie stuff, but I kind of like the part where, you know, where they showed the past. It was interesting. But this is a great movie. It builds up the tension. They do everything right in this, you know, and they had the exact right cast of hotties who could run away from this guy. The ending's great. You know, it had everything going for it. So I'm a big fan. Man, of course, they had Donald Pleasance in there as well, who's great.
Yeah, Loomis.
I watched who it was. It was Donald Pleasance, right? It was in that played the old bridge guy.
His character. Yeah, it was Dr. Loomis.
Dr. Loomis.
Yeah. I've watched every Halloween movie. I watched the last three where they brought back Jamie Lee Curtis. You know, I mean, they really
I didn't watch those.
they destroyed the end of the end of the entire series.
What's your opinion on Halloween? I believe was it 3? Season of the Witch, was that 3?
Yes.
Because that one has a lot of different opinions.
So at the time, I didn't like it because none of us liked it, because it wasn't Halloween, right? So I'm sure you know the story is that originally John Carpenter wanted to make every Halloween movie different, right? And then because Halloween was so huge, the studio was like, no, you gotta make a sequel. So then that was Halloween 2. I think that was the one where she was in the hospital. It was like the next night, or it continues, right? Or the next night. So, and he didn't want to do that, right? So then they were like, fine, you know, after that you can do your thing. So then they did Season of the Witch, which at the time was just vilified because everybody was like, it's not Halloween. Where's Michael Myers? Where's all this stuff, you know? And what's funny is, I believe in Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, on TV they see a commercial for the movie Halloween.
Yeah.
So it's in a different universe than what Halloween's in. I think I did a thing one time. There's 6 different timelines for Halloween movies because it gets weird. It gets really weird.
He was basically making his idea was, I'm going to make a full-length feature anthology series every year. Basically, every year a new thing. It's not the worst idea, frankly, you know.
It's really, they're doing it now with no, they're doing it with I just saw VHS 85. I don't know if you've seen any of the VHS series, but it's exactly what it is. It's a horror anthology. They're doing them every year. The first couple were I think theatrical releases, and then after that Shudder picked it up, and so Shudder is just doing streaming them once a year, and the latest one came out this week, and it's all segments that take place in 1985, so they all look like they're on VHS recorded on videotape, and it's not very good. But yeah, I mean, so that it was a good idea. It's just you gotta tell people what's coming. You can't just surprise people. You know, in the last Halloween movie was like Michael Myers is barely in it.
Right.
You know, and you just can't do that. You know, so
People have certain expectations now. Yeah.
right, if you call it Halloween. But you know, that movie has found it's now a cult classic. Like it found its audience. It just took a long time. It had to be almost like a generation later, like a generation of kids that weren't expecting a Halloween movie, you know, with Michael Myers. And so now, you know, Silver Shamrock, and they sell replicas of all those masks, and people know the song and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it definitely found an audience. It just took a long time.
Yeah, it did.
We can touch on this, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but under scariest movies, I put the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, man. That's probably my all-time scariest I've ever been, was watching that movie. I
saw it at a birthday party. I went to a guy's birthday party, and they were like, "Hey, we're gonna watch this movie," and I just, the whole time I was like, "Geez," you know. And again, to me it's scary because it falls under that thing where the people are just bad people because they're bad people.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Cannibals. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, there's a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies that have happened. There was the remake. I saw the remake. You know, there was one of my favorite scenes. There was that remake, and it's not that old, like 2 years old, 3 years old, something like that. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they go to this town, and Leatherface has the chainsaw, and all these people are on a tour bus, and he comes on the door, and it's the only entrance, so he's going to get everybody, right? And he's got the chainsaw, and then they show the scene from the back of the bus, and every single person puts their cell phone up, and they start recording. I love it. I just think that's exactly what would happen today.
Yeah, I agree with you. But this movie, when I look over all the things I've seen in my whole life that screwed me up, this is right near the top. I remember sitting through this. I think a lot of the scary movies I watched that in my early days were like at my granny's, when she had HBO or Cinemax or whatever she had, because we didn't have that. And so I was ill prepared because there were other people watching the movie, which meant I had to just sit there. You know how it was. There was one TV in the house at Granny's house, and someone else was controlling it. There's nowhere else to go. So I was a captive audience. Man, I'll never watch it again. I shall watch it again. I caught some of the second one, same way. I shan't watch that one again either.
The second one's good. I mean, I don't
know.
If you like Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, the second one is good.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, this one I won't say scary, disturbing.
Yeah. Then they kind of went downhill after that. For things that scared me, I put Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. I was a latecomer. I think the first of the series that I saw was Army of Darkness, so I didn't really understand the whole universe.
Yeah, that's a lot lighter fare than the other ones were.
Right. You know, you've got what are they, the Deadites? Is that the little versions of Ash or whatever?
Yeah.
I don't know. You got the little Ashes, and you got, it's kind of almost, I mean, there's some almost like Three Stooges slapstick in Army of Darkness, you know. But I went back and watched, I don't remember if I watched Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2 first. I don't remember which one, but it scared the pee out of me. That movie was terrifying.
Yeah.
And they did the remake, and the remake was terrifying, the first one. And then, you know, they've kind of got a little sillier as time went on. But when you're in a cabin and you got somebody that's turning into a monster in a basement, that's creepy, man.
Yeah, it is. My friend Gerlach his granny had lived in this house beside his house, and they eventually put her in an old folks home, and so we got to use the house all the time. So you're in your own house, and so they would watch everything you could think of blood-sucking freaks and 10,000 maniacs and all these other, or 1,000 maniacs, whatever it was. They would watch all these hideous movies. And this was one that they put on. I was there. And of course, you're there with your buddies, so you can't look like a giant puss. But I was like, my God. And it's funny to look on them now because they're like RoboCop in a way. They're so over the top and insane. It was like, huge torrents of blood, all this goofy crap, and the monsters all are goofy. Just a goofy. Even the first one was scarier, but sort of goofy. The second one was pretty goofy, and then the third one was real goofy. But they're disturbing. You're right. People being possessed, people getting killed. That freak in the basement, I can hear her voice right in my head right now. When
mom,
when she's whacking the door, now? My God, a scary film, but great. And also, of course, you got Ash Ketchum. Ash Ketchum is the guy from Pokemon. You get Ash Williams in this, which is great. Ash is awesome. Bruce Campbell, who went on to have a great career, did a lot of stuff. But I even watched a TV show for the first couple seasons it was on. It was okay, but it wasn't bad. But as a great series of films. If I had to pick a favorite, it'd be the third one, just because it's more palatable and it's a lot more funny. But they're all good. Right. They're all quite good. I enjoyed every one of them.
I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in maybe 9th grade, 10th grade, I had a motorcycle, so I could drive, I could go wherever I wanted by myself. And I went to the mall one time, and I think I just heard about maybe Evil Dead 2 or something. Yeah. And I went to the mall, and I found a copy of the Necronomicon. You remember they were selling that?
The Necronomicon.
The Necronomicon. Yeah. And I bought it, and it was a paperback. And I came home, and I was looking, and it was like the Tales of the Mad Monk, and it had all these symbols and stuff, and it said, if you read this, a demon will help you, or a spirits will help you with your. And I just got weirded out, man. I was like, I don't know that I should own this, And so I went and I told my mom. I was like, hey, listen, Mom, I got to tell you, like, I got this book, and my mom goes, you think they sell books that let you summon demons at Barnes and Noble? And I go, yeah, that's probably a good point. Probably not. She goes, yeah, you might look at. Of course, we didn't have the internet back then. You couldn't just Google and say, oh, just some made up, hooey fooey or whatever.
We had that book in my middle school library. Okay, so I have seen it many times. Written by the Mad Arab Abdul Alcazar. Not bound in human flesh. I will say there's a really good, since we're talking about films, there's a good movie called The Necronomicon that was out back in the day. I think it's in the 80s. That has Jeffrey Combs in it. The same guy that was in Reanimator is in it. And it's sort of, as I recall, I can't remember if it's an anthology movie or just a strip movie, but I remember enjoying it quite a bit. So that's one if you want something really bizarre to kick into. That's kind of a more conventional, fun horror movie.
I like the idea that in your high school, your mid-high, that if demons showed up or whatever, all they'd have to do is go to the library and get the card to see who had checked out that book. Yeah. And then they would go down. That would be their list of suspects. Right?
Well, you needed that book for your demon summoning 3 o'clock, 7th period. You got to get in there.
Right. Then that's when you want to be sure to turn in on time. You don't want to get that note sent home to your parents like, well, little Johnny hasn't turned in the Necronomicon.
Yeah.
Yeah, Evil Dead, good one.
Yeah.
I put, on scary movies, I put Last House on the Left. I'm going to guess this is not a movie that is a favorite of yours.
No.
I won't even say that it's a favorite of mine.
I knew of it. I would tell you that. I was aware of it.
It terrified me. And it's, again, it's that type of, it's that horror where you don't, the people didn't deserve it. They just got it. And wrong place, wrong time, and there's a lot of there was a lot of movies around that time that had to do like bad things. I'm trying to dance around this topic here, but bad things happened to women, and then women had to get revenge. You know what I mean? It was that
the old
kind of
spit on your grave routine.
Exactly. It's the exact same thing. And yeah, it was, you know, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to watch that kind of horror, you know. But it is horror, you know. But it's not like ghosts or whatever. It's like the kind of horror that could happen in real life. You know, I think that's what got me on that one. Like I said, I don't know if you have anything to say on Last House on the Left.
I didn't see that one. I moved out the door on that one. I know.
I'm gonna say it's a skipper for you. No one to your taste.
I'm out, brother, on that one.
Yeah, because it's one of those things where it plants those seeds, and the next time you're at the lake, and then some people come by and they park in a van, and then you're like, well, is that going to be the inbred guys that are going to take us and kill us, you know? Or, yeah, it's a rough one.
What a way to go, too. No thanks.
Yeah.
Around here, that's a viable possibility, by the way.
Yeah. And then I put for scariest movies. This came out about 10 years ago, but I put The Descent on here. I don't know if you saw The Descent.
I heard about this one. It's another one I was like, I'm not gonna go see that one. But yeah, I did hear about this one.
You know, it's one of those where a good horror movie is like where you go, boy, the worst thing that could possibly happen has happened, and then things get worse, you know?
Yeah.
And it's about these 6 girls, and they go spelunking in a cave, and they have it all planned out. They're like, hey, you know, worst case scenario, there's 3 exits out of this cave, and we got a map, and we got all this. And they get down in this cave, and then right off the bat, there's a cave in. So they're not getting out of the cave. And then one of the girls says, by the way, I took you to a different cave, so we don't have a map. And we don't know that there's an exit. And then one of the girls falls into a hole and breaks her leg. And you go, Jesus, could anything get worse? And that's when the monsters show up. And you go, yeah, it could get a lot worse. It's about to. They look like Gollum. And there's one chasing them, and then all of a sudden there's 100 chasing them. I mean, it's I have mentioned on podcasts and stuff that we recently went to Mexico, and we went to visit a cenote, which is essentially a cave that you can go in and swim in. And I just saw The Descent again recently, and I was glad I didn't watch it before I went to Mexico, because there's no way I'd be down in a cave. That would cure me of that immediately.
I watched this show on YouTube, and they have a podcast too. It's called Scary Interesting, I think is what it's called. And he goes over a lot of like horrible stories involving spelunking and deep sea diving and stuff. And so just without the monster, this would be a horrific scene. I mean,
it's bad enough, right?
People straight up die all the time doing that. So you throw in some little freaks, the Morlocks are in town, you're screwed. Yeah.
By the way, I read the trivia on The Descent, and it said that there is no real cave. No real cave appears in that movie. That every single shot is on a soundstage. They made all that cave because they said filming inside a cave would have been too difficult.
Yeah.
So they built their own cave, and then there's a shot at the beginning where they're like going down in the cave, and it says that shot is CGI. So there's no cave. There's no real cave appears in that movie, which is crazy.
That's something you can tell yourself while you're watching it. It's like, oh, they're not really stuck.
This one is I mean, you might want to plug your ears for the next 15 seconds, because I'm going to tell a minor spoiler. I mean, kind of a major spoiler about the ending. But there's 2 endings to this movie as well. There's the original UK ending, and when audiences saw it, they said, this is the most depressing movie I've ever seen, and this will never fly in the United States. And so in the United States, they cut the last 30 seconds off the end of the film. Now, if you get the DVD, I have it on DVD, and you can watch both endings. But here's what I'll say. On the US version, one person makes it out of the cave. And the UK version, nobody makes it out of the cave. It's right up there with it wasn't not The Fog. What was the Stephen King movie where they were all the monsters were coming out of the Mist.
That's the one Mist. I was talking about that made me sick. That's the other one, was The Mist. That's exactly the one it was. That was a sleeper to me. I thought that was a pretty good flick. I like that one.
I liked it till the ending,
Yeah, the ending got a little weird, and then it got real weird at the end. But yeah.
Yeah, it got pretty, yeah. But up until that, because, The Mist, Stephen King does this. Stephen King likes to take a handful of people that are all different and throw them all in a situation.
Yeah.
And then let the people interact. That's what he did with It. That's what he did with The Stand. That's what he did with Dark Tower. So that's what he does, right? He takes a bunch of people, throws them together. And so you think about The Mist, where all of a sudden there's monsters coming to that, and you're stuck in a supermarket with a bunch of strangers, and you don't know how people are going to react. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Do you take command? Do you sit in the back? I'll go hide in the back and eat all the zingers. If we ain't going to make it, I'm going to the hostess aisle, baby.
Last year, just be the guy who lays around and does nothing like a rock. I believe that was your strategy for being lost in the woods. So I think that's what I would do.
Yeah,
I'd be the guy that would survive the whole ordeal and then be sued by one of the other survivors. That's how I picture it working.
Yeah, exactly. You end up in court later. You're like, I didn't know it was going to be a giant worm thing. I just said go out there, So we can transition from the scariest ones to I kind of made a list of my favorite horror movies. And again, I could run through some of these. Some we've already touched on, and we could jump through. Night of the Living Dead, we've already talked about.
Yes.
It's such a classic. It's a classic.
I agree. I agree with that.
You watch it from beginning to end. It's just a film structure. And one of the great things about that movie is there's so many horror movies where, not necessarily today they get into it, but there's a lot of old horror movies where you're going to have a 15, 20, 30-minute setup.
Yeah.
You got to get to the haunted house. You got to do this. You got to do that. I don't know what Night of the Living Dead, you see a zombie in the first minute and a half.
Yeah.
It's pretty quick, so
it runs, you get into it right away and right till the end, which is great. I love that.
Yeah, it goes. So that's definitely on my list. And by the way, when I say my list of favorite horror movies, I narrowed this down from about 2000.
Yeah. I've got a huge
about 5 or 6, I put The Gate on this list. Did you ever see The Gate?
Long ago. I saw it a sleepover way back. My God.
My buddy Jeff and I, we resembled the two kids in The Gate. Like, he was tall and skinny and had those big glasses, and I was the shorter version. Man, there's that scene in The Gate. Remember where there's the thing is that they find this geode, and then the geode opens this hole, and it's basically a hole to hell in their backyard, and then things start coming out. But there's a construction workman that they find that was stuck in the wall, that was boarded up in the walls of their house, and there's that scene when he falls and he turns into all the little ones and all. That movie was terrifying.
Yeah,
there's some scary stuff in that movie. And of course there was also, this is the 80s, so you got that big scene where he's playing the what was it, the Killer Dwarves. That was he's listening to the Killer Dwarves, and he plays the record backwards, and then that starts, so you play into all that. But there is a Gate 2. I actually have Gate 2, both of them on DVD, and the Gate 2 is terrible.
I never even heard of that, so that doesn't surprise me.
No, and it's many years later too. It's the kid. It's the tall, skinny kid. He's back in it. He's driving around in his car and stuff. It's not good. Let's see what else I have on this list. Funhouse. Is Funhouse? Is that something that you saw or was in your wheelhouse?
I haven't seen Funhouse. I think I remember it vaguely, but I don't remember anything about it. I don't think
Funhouse.
I saw it.
It was actually made by Toby Hooper, and so it's his film that he made between Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist. Depending
great! That's all we need.
How much you believe that he did Poltergeist? People have gone back and forth on that, but
I've heard that.
Funhouse is there's these kids that go to a carnival. It's like a double date. They go to a carnival, and then one of the girls' younger brother, he's sneakily tagging along. But they go to this this carnival, and they go through the funhouse ride, which is kind of scary. And then they kind of do basically the gist of it is they hop out of the ride, and they hide in the funhouse, right? And so there's a guy that he wears this mask. He almost looks like Frankenstein, and he's helping work the funhouse. And then what we find out is he's this really deformed monster-looking guy. He looks like Sloth from the Goonies. And he's like an inbred kind of monster guy. And his dad is the guy that runs the funhouse. Actually, it's the same actor that plays the Barker, and the same actor plays a bunch of different parts. But what happens is the monster guy basically pays to the fortune teller lady's also a prostitute, and so she hires him to come in, and the kids are watching. They're like he spying on him, and the monster ends up killing the prostitute, and the dad comes in and he's like, hey, we can't let anybody know about it. And then the kids make a noise, and they're like, uh-oh. And so now it's on. I mean, now it's a chase movie where they're trying to find the kids, and they're having to hide all through this fun house, and one at a time they're getting killed and stuff. It's a great I mean, it's a simple setup, but it's just done so well. I love the idea of being in a fun house. You know what I mean? Like a haunted house on rails. Like it takes place in there. It's just so good. Now there's a one little bit of controversy about this film is that there's a list of gosh, what is it? I'm just drawing a blank right now. But it was when the UK came up with their the naughty list of movies. I forgot what it's called, but basically they came up with a list of 75 movies. The video nasties over there, yeah. The video nasties. Thank you. There's actually a documentary about the video nasties. It's really good. And there's a really terrible movie called Funhouse that's apparently just full of nudity and sex and violence and stuff like that. And so they put Funhouse on the video nasty list in the UK, but I think mistakenly this is the movie that they ended up banning. So this movie, because it has the same name, so they banned this name in the UK. Yeah, it's a really good movie, and it got released on Blu-ray 4K a couple of years ago with a commentary track and stuff, and so it's really good. I just really enjoy it, but part of it's the setting, I think, for me. Let's see, we talked about Jaws. This is one that we can't go through a horror movies without talking about, and it is the 1982 movie from John Carpenter, The Thing. Now, are you a fan of The Thing? Did you like the original?
I didn't see the remake. I mean, I saw the Carpenter one, which I didn't.
Okay.
I never saw the black and white one or any of the one that came after. But I saw it is a frightening film, especially if you haven't seen it the first time. I
went in not knowing anything about it. I thought it was going to be like The Shining, where they were just stuck in the winter, like abandoned. Like I had no idea when I went into that movie, and I saw it relatively late. I mean, I probably saw it for the first time in the past 10 years. I don't know how I never saw it. And I was a big fan of Kirk Douglas. I love Big Trouble in Little China. I love Snake Plissken. I love all those movies. So The Thing is, I would say, similar to Jaws in that it's just, gosh darn, almost perfect. It's just almost a perfect movie. It plays on multiple levels of horror. I mean, obviously there's a level of horror like, okay, there's a monster in the camp and we can't leave the camp. You leave the camp, you're going to freeze to death. You can't leave, right? Yeah. So we're stuck here with this monster. Yeah. But then it amps it up, and the monster can look like other people. So now you can't trust anybody, and so that it's a whole nother level of horror. This is such a good movie. We live in an age where you could do anything with CGI. You can write anything in your script. You can just say, okay, in this scene, in the next scene, the guy's eyeballs go out of his head and they turn into butterflies and they fly. And you go, well, okay, we'll just do it in CGI. It doesn't matter, right? But back in the day of practical effects, like there was something to be said to make something that would scare the bejesus out of you, and they did it in The Thing. There's some that head, the spider thing with the head on it. I mean, there's stuff that's just bizarre.
At the time, that was one of the scariest special effects I'd ever seen. It was just like, oh my god. Yeah, horrific. I agree. This is another one that's on the top of the list. Real scary.
Terrifying movie. Absolutely love it. This is definitely, I mean, you got to be in the right mood to sit down and watch it. You know what I mean? Like you can't just be like, hey, I'm bored tonight, I'm gonna put on The Thing. But man, when you're in the mood for it. And by the way, the newer one that came out is pretty good. And then what you find out at the end of it is that it's really a prequel. It kind of ends where The Thing starts.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, so there's a little bit of...
So maybe that might put me over the edge on that.
Yeah, so it's a good watch. But yeah, any film... I see a Super Tech Boy in the chat mention body snatcher movies. And yeah, it's any of those type of movies where, like I said, when it looks like somebody... And I guess you could even say like a possession type movie, or when it looks like your friend, but they're not acting like your friend. You know what I mean? That's just a certain level of horror. I put on here Black Christmas. Black Christmas is it's called I believe it is the first slasher film. It's kind of referred to as the first slasher film. Black Christmas takes place in a sorority, and there's a guy who keeps calling and heavy breathing and all this stuff, and then the sorority girls start dying and stuff like that. There's a very, very traumatic death towards the end of the film where one of the girls, and by the way, I believe that's Margot Kidder.
Yeah.
This is one of her early roles before she was Lois Lane. Before she lost her mind. But there's a death where the killer sneaks up behind a girl and basically saran wraps her. And you sit there and you watch someone suffocate through the saran wrap. You know what I mean? Like he's just wrapping them up. And it is terrifying. It's a scary movie. But I mean, I wouldn't say... sometimes like I said, some of these movies like Jaws, or Night of the Living Dead, like they're just such great, perfect movies. I don't think that Black Christmas is necessarily perfect, but it's the template. You know what I mean? It's every other movie that came after it. There's a guy that's stalking people in the house and he's getting them one by one. It's like this is the first one. So if you watch this, you could save yourself from watching 1,000 other ones, which did not save me.
Yeah.
Right. And then I watched all the other 1,000 too. You know what? I'll skip down here too. Rosemary's Baby, which is another one. Rosemary's Baby. I actually read the book, and very rarely, I would say the book and the movie are 99% identical. I mean, it is literally, the movie is literally the book. So, a lot of these things obviously get changed, over time or whatever. But, it's, again, it's that older, it's late 60s, right? Maybe early 70s. I think it's late 60s. But it's definitely like a tension kind of horror. It's old school kind of horror.
It is. I saw this at church camp, if you can believe it. We were up late, and it was on in the middle of the night, and no idea what it was, and we missed the very beginning of it. So we missed the normal parts, because most of this movie is just sort of weird, not scary. Mm-hmm. But at the end, of course,
it's paranoid, right?
Scary.
Paranoia.
Yeah. But gosh, this is another one that really had a lot of Jack. It's just considered one of the all-time great horror films. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I mean, certainly it delivers on what it's doing. It does a good job of giving you, the premise is good. I like it.
Sure.
But it's another one I get freaked out over because it is creepy.
Yeah, it's definitely, and again, it's that same type of paranoia where it's like, you got the nice neighbors, you got your husband, you got the people, and then first of all, you find out they're all working together.
Yeah.
And that, you don't trust your husband, so you go talk to the doctor, and then by the time when you get home, your husband's like, hey, the doctor told me. It's like, you can't trust anybody. There's nobody can keep a secret. You know what I mean? It's constantly just people either in front of you or behind your back betraying your trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know there's of course it became part of our vernacular, the term gaslighting, but there was the original, I don't know what it was, 30s, 40s, the film Gaslight, which is where it comes from. And it is an entire movie where the husband is slowly trying to convince the woman that she is crazy, and he keeps doing things and moving things and so that's where the term gaslighting comes from. But it's that weird horror kind of paranoia where when somebody that you think you can trust, and all of a sudden you can't trust them, that's a weird kind of situation.
Yeah, when you, especially in a film, as a viewer, you watch a film and their buddies there or whatever, and that's a point of comfort in a disturbing film. And then when that's taken away, that's when they get yeah, when you're all alone all of a sudden. So, you got any other your favorite horror movies or stuck with you? Or just I'll bust
ones
out a
that you love?
couple that you
Sure.
didn't mention. You mentioned a lot of really good ones. A couple that kind of mind I thought were quite scary. The original Phantasm, I thought was.
Oh.
I think it had Angus. Was it Angus Grimm or that old guy's name was? That guy's double creepy. The guy that played the tall thin man of that Brandon mortuary, and with his creepy silver ball of death at that mortuary. Plus, I like the wacky aspects of the heroes of the first couple of those. So I would throw that in the mix. By the way, that guy's one of the all-time scary, creepy guys. He just passed away a few years ago, and he was but he milked that to the nines. I saw him in TV commercials and music videos, and he was everywhere.
Yeah.
He was always
great. I remember I spent the night at a friend's house one night, and we were flipping channels, and we watched part of the original Phantasm, and I was like, I don't understand what's happening. And then I was somewhere else and I saw a little bit of it, and I was like, I don't understand what's happening. And then finally, I rented the movie. I watched the whole movie, and I went, I still don't know what's happening.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't made no more sense. And I think I remember thinking that I maybe enjoyed Phantasm 2 more than the first one.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that way. Now, they're sort of interchangeable to me, but I like them both. Another one I want to bring.
Feels like one long movie, yeah.
Yeah, I want to also we just briefly touched on this one, but I got to mention Reanimator, Jeffrey Combs, great flick, creepy, weird, strange film based on H.P. Lovecraft. I thought that was a real fun movie. It didn't take itself too seriously, but it was still a fun, kind of a disturbing. It was also a high school favorite back in the day when that stuff was going on.
Well, there was it's funny that you mentioned that. I just want to say, because, there were so many of these movies, when you were young, in high school or middle school, we weren't, when you were 13, 14, you weren't going to the movies and watching Reanimator. At least I wasn't, you know. But then you would go to someone's house and they'd be like, hey, man, have you seen this? Or late night TV, it would be. And so you kind of had this networking that happened, where someone would say, hey, you got to watch, Chopping Mall.
Yeah.
Or Faces of Death. I saw at someone's house.
Because Faces of Death, I hated those movies, but I watched every one of them. They were all phony, baloney, garbage, but it was just something that that was a rite of passage at your slumber party. You're going to watch the Faces of Death films. Another movie, and this one didn't get a lot of play, but again, it's another one that, in the old days, no one knew what I was talking about, but now some people have seen it by now, which I thought was kind of a creepy gothic horror film, was called The Company of Wolves. Did you ever see this one, Flack?
I've not seen this one.
This is it's an odd film that sort of jumps between times, and it's got a very dreamy atmosphere. But I mean, it's a werewolf tale that, and among other things, with a small village in the woods. But what it really is, it's a weird dreamlike film that is basically showing the final throes of a young girl becoming a woman. And I don't mean that in a sexual way. I mean, it's like this is sort of like a metaphor or something. But it's real good. It's got Angela Lansbury's in it, and a cast that you probably haven't heard of, aside from her. But it had a real ethereal quality to it, and you get like wolves are scary, okay, and a pack of wolves are scary, and a pack of wolves coming at you in the dark with some fog on it. It's double scary. And then the werewolf parts of this are good too. There's also some transformation stuff in this. This is one, if you haven't seen it yet, I would check it out. I think anyone that's into sort of that more gothic horror would enjoy it. I'm going to mention this one because it didn't really scare me, but I thought that the premise stuck with me because I thought it was so clever, it's fairly recent. It's called Final Destination. I don't know if you saw that.
Sure.
Where these people were supposed to die on a plane. They didn't die, and so basically death is screwing them through a series of wacky accidents. The thing that stuck with me about this film is the fact that every time that John Denver's Rocky Mountain High plays in the movie, you know someone's going to get killed. And there's a classic scene where Famke Janssen is dancing around with that record on, and the record finishes, and you're like, whoa, she made it. She almost died about 20 ways. But she accidentally rams her booty into the record plate. It starts back up or whatever, and then you know she's toast. You know, I always thought that. But I like the concept that you didn't die when you were supposed to, so now there's a series of goofy incidents that are going to kill you because you cheated death. So he's going to screw you in a weird way. I thought that was a pretty fun one there. So those are all on my list. I mean, you're right. We had a million of these things we could have went over. I've skipped over a ton of these things. Maybe we'll because we didn't talk about Hammer films. There's plenty of those in there.
I had such small topics for us to cover, like every Korean horror film.
I was going to ask you, before, just because you mentioned it, do you watch many foreign horror movies? I don't mean like the UK. Did you, someone mentioned The Ring earlier, which is a pretty creepy film from Japan. Did you watch many of the foreign horror?
I have. Not necessarily when I was younger. When I got my first apartment, I lived next door to this place called Kaleidoscope Rental. It was like a mom and pop video rental place, and of course I was broke as dirt, and but they would always have deals. You could rent VHS movies, and you could rent Nintendo games. And it was literally next door to the apartment. So we'd walk over there and we would go rent stuff like that. In fact, I think I've told this story on a podcast, but when that place closed down, they put up a sign outside that said permanently closing. All the movies are up for sale. And I stopped by there and I said, how much are the movies? And they said they're $10 each. And I go, oh, well, enjoy your sale, And I went back about a week later to see if there was anything left, and they said movies were $1. And I said, I will take the horror section and the kung fu or ninja section. And they go, well, what movies? I go, the whole thing. Whatever's left. So I think I spent about $200. And they boxed it up, but I had a couple hundred of horror movies and stuff.
You still have that stuff?
So I got rid of a lot of them over the years, and then of course replaced them. Like I didn't save the VHS because then I would get it on DVD. So then I would go, don't need the VHS anymore. I wish that I still had some of those, but anyway,
at some point we're going to have a long, in-depth discussion on some of these horror films from across the pond. We could do a whole show on that, because there's some good stuff, but you have to kind of be picky, I guess, would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, I did end up, like I got a few foreign stuff, and that was kind of what got me into it. Korean stuff there's a lot of Korean. They do a lot of like spirits coming back. It's a lot of spirits. It's a lot of ghost kind of stuff. There, there's a lot of Korean stuff like that. And then I'll tell you this, like when I was first getting on the internet, and then and all of a sudden, like maybe like 99 or 2000, when you could start like downloading movies and stuff. And I got some Japanese horror stuff, and it was some of the worst, most disgusting stuff that I had ever seen in my life. Like really, really violent, gory horror Japanese. I was like, they seem like such nice people.
No, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you on that stuff. I can get on a lot better with the British stuff, for example. We have.
Oh, and then there's the Italian stuff, which it's really kind of a trifecta. But I would say Argenta, Fulci, Suspiria.
That's what I was thinking of. We have really you vaguely mentioned, but which would be a good way to finish us off tonight, because we didn't get into it too much, since it is Friday the 13th, and we didn't really go into our favorite series that much. Did you have a favorite of the Friday the 13th films, if any, for that matter? And did you have some that you thought we would gouge your own eyes out because of when that came out?
For Friday the 13th specifically?
Yeah, or any of the Friday the 13th movies.
Yeah, I would say, the first one's great. But of course, Friday the 13th is like one of those misunderstood franchise. I mean, it's not like big secrets, but of course, like in the first one, Jason's not even the killer. Jason's mom's the killer. And then in the second movie is the one where Jason has the sack over his head. He doesn't get his,
he looks like
his hockey mask. Yeah. He gets the hockey mask in the third one. So the third one is good, but then of course the third one is the 3D. So you got like that scene with the pitchfork where he's like, doing that kind of stuff.
I think the third one it's probably my favorite of the first three. I didn't think the first one, I know people love it. It wasn't my favorite. Probably because I saw it after I'd seen the other ones. It's a lot like the Halloween. It's like, where's the guy? Where's the guy? He wasn't in this one,
Right,
the guy.
Right. I think is Friday the 13th 4. I think is the one where he's up against the girl with the psychic powers, and like she, I don't know. They start running together. Not the one with. I think that's 4, where he's like they put him at the bottom of the lake, and tied him to the thing, and then her dad drowns, and she tries to resurrect the dad, but she resurrects him, and then it's at the end of it, it's him versus the girl with the psychic powers. That's a really good one, and I think that's the first one I actually saw in a theater. Like I'd seen the other ones on VHS or whatever, but that was the first one where we went, and I was like, okay, this is kind of a fun thing. I think universally, the was it 8 where Jason Takes Manhattan?
What a letdown.
That one's really, really bad.
That premise had feet. I saw a thing where they basically was a money thing, and they were, that series is not exactly the most well managed, but I thought, man, Jason Takes Manhattan, this is going to be, I actually was excited about that. And Jason took a long boat ride in that movie. He did not take that. Although there was the funny thing is they only showed in the trailers, like him smashing that guy's beatbox or pounding that guy on that rooftop. That was, and you're like, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. He's gonna be taking on gang members and stuff. No, it's a ripoff.
I sort of like, even though it wasn't really, it was a stupid movie, but I think Jason X, the one where he was in outer space. It's a goofy movie. It's a dumb idea. It's basically it's Alien. But that was like where they had this huge budget. You know what I mean? There's that scene where he takes the girl's head and puts it in the liquid nitrogen, and then smashes it into a million pieces. I was like, I just couldn't believe that. I think you're showing either 5 or 6 with little. That's little
this is
Tommy Jarvis.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Corey Feldman.
Yeah, this is the one where they decide against anyone's better judgment to pull him out, and they put the stick in him and he gets shot by lightning, I believe is the way it goes down.
Yeah,
and he's back.
There's always something, it's the same thing with those Nightmare on Elm Street movies where, especially if you watch them back to back to back, like they always end with a way, and they're like, the only way to kill Freddy forever is to do this. You gotta get his bones, and you gotta bury it in a hallowed place and put holy water, and you go, okay. And then the next movie, when there was the one where the dog like just peed fire on him, and he goes, well, there he goes, he's back. Like, no matter what you do in the movie, there's always the next one where they just come back, or whatever. But yeah, Friday the 13th. And then I will say one of the ones that had the, you're talking about Jason Takes Manhattan, but one of the ones that just had such potential that never had, that was terrible, was the Freddy versus Jason.
I saw that in the theater opening night, believe it or not.
Did you?
I did, and I was disappointed. I was extremely disappointed in that. I think everyone was. I don't think a lot of people were down with that.
I think that's, I'm guessing 2002, 2003, somewhere around there. And I remember watching it, and they were like, first of all, they go, there was a guy that killed people here, and they go, oh, and I'm like, there's a house in my neighborhood where a high school kid hung himself in the 70s. Everybody knows where that house is. If you lived on a street where there were multiple child murders over and over, you would know that about your neighborhood. And they're always surprised. They're always like, what? There was a murder on our street? I'm telling you would know that. And then in that movie, they're like, we've got to go research this. And they go to the library and they get it on microfiche. In 2003, I love that scene, and they're like doing microfiche, and I'm like, oh boy, what's going on here?
I remember, not only was I was actually I worked at a theater when one of the big Freddy movies came out, and it was the same for this one. Like, he had a real draw. Like, the opening nights were always real huge for the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, where Jason's a hit or miss, I think. Freddy was pretty popular, probably because he had a lot more personality,
Sure.
But this one was a packed house for this when I saw it, Freddy versus Jason, and it was a lot like when I went and saw the prequel movies. It's just like, after the movie was over, it wasn't like Blair Witch, for example, where everybody's like, oh, it's a buzz. There was just people walking out. It looked like Night of the Living Dead, and with their heads held down, just dropping their popcorn where they sat. They were like, they just walked away. They'd been robbed of their money. It was a real bummer. But hey, that's what happens. There was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that ruined that film, I think, but it was ruined.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah. The Nightmare on Elm Street, the whole series, in general, I would say, the first one was scary. The first one, it was a scary movie. And then the second one was kind of weird, And then the third one, I don't know what people think about it. The third one, it's not the scariest, but if I had to sit down and watch one, like if I just had to randomly pick one, it's always going to be the third one. The third one is my favorite one, the Dream Warriors, and you get all the kids that get their powers. I just love that movie.
Got that
and
stupid
then
song. What was it? Who did the theme?
Dawkins.
Was that Dawkins?
Rockin' with Dawkins. Have you rented the on the movie? It shows the movie and then the end credits, and then you get the whole video for Dream Warriors.
Oh man.
Yeah. So that was like my favorite one. And then like I said, they kept turning Freddy more and more into like a stand-up comedian. Like there was the one where he was a chef, he'd be like, no, you're cooking with me, or what? And like every time it just kept getting dumber and dumber,
I remember the New Nightmare was just horrible. That was real bad. Wes Craven's
that
New
was
Nightmare.
not good.
Yeah, they dropped the ball in that. That was the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, he went out with a whimper. I don't know if they ever brought him back. I don't know if they have or not. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, they did the Nightmare on Elm Street, the remake, and
I didn't see that. Was it any good?
You know what? It was okay, but I'm going to draw a blank on his name. But you remember Bad News Bears, the original Bad News Bears?
Sure. I love that movie. Yeah.
And
Walter Matthau.
Yeah, and then there was the one kid, the older guy that was always on the motorcycle. I mean, the older teen.
Oh, yeah.
That was on the motorcycle or whatever. That kid, Jackie Hale Early, I think is his name. That's who plays Freddy. And I mean, he does a good job, but in all the scenes where he doesn't have, like, before he's burned and stuff, I'm like, that's all I could see now. It's the kid from Bad News Bears, you know. So he's a good actor, but he's got a recognizable face, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think
we covered all those big ones. I mean, you know what? I'll talk about Chucky for 30 seconds. I thought Chucky at first. I mean, I thought the first Chucky movie was okay, but again, the second one is my go-to one. That's the one with the kid who survived the first one, and then he's with the girl. What are they? They're like not orphans, but they're like foster kids. They're like in the and then of course, you know, every adult. Here's what I learned from that movie: when there's a foster kid, and they're like, "Hey, there's something that's trying to kill me," listen to that kid. Or you're gonna be dead. So I mean, every single adult they talk to in that movie, they're just like, "That doll's gonna get you," and then they're like, "No."
It would be hard. Chucky. It would be hard to buy that story unless you're gonna be killed by that doll. It's like, nah, I'm not going.
Yeah, and again, it's that same thing with the Children of the Corn. Like when I see the Chucky doll, I just feel like I could take a doll.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. I'll admit, I've never seen the Chucky movie. The premise was so stupid.
None of them?
Like, no, I never saw it.
Oh, yeah, they're fun. They're fun,
me.
kind of. And then there's the Bride of Chucky, and then there's the Chucky TV series. Like they've really kind of milked it, you know.
No kidding. It's a killer doll. How much? When they announced that TV show, I was stunned. I was like, oh my god.
You wonder where the story could go, and then they take it some places. But yeah, man, is it? I feel, although normally I know you like to take it to the house, but all we've talked about is haunted houses. Can we take it somewhere that's not haunted?
Time to take it to the late night Taco Bell drive-through. I think we'll be safe.
All right, that's something we can do.
Thanks everybody for popping in tonight to hang out. It was a slim, trim, tight 3-hour session, Flack.
Hey, we trimmed off about 40 hours.
We could have kept going. This reminds me of our conversation of the night when we weren't recording. It's very similar.
Yeah. What else do you have planned for the rest of the month? You got some stuff lined up for more conversations from the dark side coming up?
I do. We've got two. Of course, me and Flack decided just to go right for the low-hanging fruit this year. But next week, I'm going to be interviewing one or two actual real-life ghost hunters for the show. So that should be fun. And we'll take questions and if there are any comments. Flack, if you're able, we'll get you back in as well because that should be interesting. And then in 2 weeks, right before Halloween, it's our annual ghost story extravaganza. Now, for those that are still with me and Flack here at the end, normally, in fact, last year the ghost story extravaganza was short because there was not a lot of Jack from the various folks. So if you've got anything that you think's remotely scary, please call the hotline you've seen all night, or send an email over to the Darkside at email.com, or send me something on Discord, wherever you want, or we'll have you on the show, whatever you want to do. Get in here with your scary stories in 2 weeks. We'd love to have some interesting material from you, the listener. Though Flack has had some really good stories over the last couple years, and I've got a few people lined up, hopefully, that's got to have some good material. That'll be in 2 weeks. Next week, Ghost Hunters. It'll be fun to pick their brain, I think, Flack.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I bet they have, hopefully people have some questions. Send in your questions for the ghost hunters, and we'll put them on the spot and find out just what they know about ghost hunting.
Very good, very good. Well, thanks everybody for turning out. I'll go ahead and take her down. We'll see you next week. Thanks again from me and Flack, and sleep with one eye open, everybody. It could be a long night. Adios.
you've just experienced Conversations from the Dark Side. Until next week, try to enjoy the daylight.